Madam City Clerk, are we ready to begin?
Not yet.
Okay.
Okay, Karen, it's on YouTube. Okay, go ahead, Mayor Beach.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our annual, but virtually done this year, meeting of the City Council and joint meeting with our Burlingame Planning Commissioners. We're really glad you joined us. It's Saturday morning, May 2nd, 2020. And we will call the meeting to order at 9:03 a.m. We're glad you're with us. We're going to start with roll call momentarily. I will briefly have our, actually I'll say a few words after roll call and then I'll turn it over to our Community Development Director, Kevin Gardner. But first, let's take roll call to make sure we've got everybody here and everybody can be introduced. Madam City Clerk, are you doing roll call or is Director Gardner?
Sure, I can do it. Councilmember Coulson. Councilmember Coulson.
On mute.
You're on mute, Councilmember Coulson.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't see that I was on mute. Sorry about that. But here.
Councilmember Bradford.
It's morning.
Here.
Councilmember Ortiz.
Unmuted.
Vice Mayor O'Brien.
Here.
Mayor Beach.
Here.
And Kevin, do you want to do the Planning Commission?
Yes, so Commissioner Loftus.
I'm here.
Commissioner Sargent.
I'm here.
Chair Say.
Here.
Commissioner Camarado.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Commissioner Taronis.
Here.
Commissioner Gall.
Here.
Commissioner Schmid.
Here.
Did I get everybody? I'm kind of going around the numbers here.
All right, I think
I do believe we have everybody.
All right, thank you so much, Director Gardner. We appreciate it. So before I turn it over to Director Gardner to kind of give an overview of the meeting, I did just want to take this opportunity again to welcome members of the public and appreciate that everybody's taking time out of their Saturday, either join us virtually or and commissioners and staff here on a Saturday morning. This is an important meeting every year. It gives us an opportunity as City Council policymakers to reconnect with a commission that has a lot of important authority that we delegate as far as shaping construction projects, both residential and commercial throughout the city. And so we admire and appreciate all the time and energy our planning commissioners spend in that effort. Twice a month meetings is every bit of a heavy load in many ways as City Council. Focused on construction, and this is just a great touch point where we can kind of connect and discuss policy together and projects. This morning we are going to have some conversations about policy. We'll also have an update of what's going on, how COVID-19 certainly is affecting the city. And then we will have the opportunity to also discuss a project that hopefully will inspire and uplift us all during these challenging times as we discuss the future of our hopefully town square community open space. But I want to just set as a backdrop, COVID-19, these are really, really busy times for the city and the staff to shift gears and figure out how to continue essential services virtually. So in the backdrop of this meeting that we're all here together on a Saturday morning, we're also in the middle of budget cycle preparation. And for our staff members and directors of different departments, there's a big lift going on behind the scenes to figure out how the city is going to respond with our revenues decreasing and how we're responding to COVID-19. So everybody's really working overtime. And I just want to say a very special thank you to our city staff for being with us on a Saturday morning. It's always above and beyond the call of duty, but this one, particularly this year in the context of all we're dealing with COVID-19, it's very, very much appreciated. And of course, to our commissioners and members of the public, during Groundhog Day, every day kind of feels the same, but we do treasure, everybody needs some time off on the weekends to sort of reset. And we appreciate that you're with us this morning as well. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Community Development Director Kevin Gardner to kind of give us the rules of the road, how we're going to interact with the public and manage this meeting online. And then we will begin thereafter following the agenda. So Kevin, if you want to take it away.
Thank you, Mayor Beach, members of the council and the Planning Commission. We really appreciate you all joining us this Saturday morning, and this is an annual event, and we're excited that we're able to still do it this year, even in a virtual format. We have some interesting items. The first one is just an update on what's happening with planning and building in terms of the city's ability to oversee construction projects and take on new applications. Then we move to an overview of the adaptive reuse proposal for the former post office at 220 Park Road, followed by a related item related to that proposal for a town square right next door on parking lot E. And this has been an idea that's been kind of in the background for quite some time, so we're excited to see that moving forward. This will be the first time to really discuss that here. And then last, we have our kind of perennial topic of staff recommendations to the Planning Commission. So it's been 5 years since we had that conversation before. So this seemed like a good opportunity to revisit it just for the sake of checking in and seeing where the lay of the land may have been changing over these last 5 years. In terms of public comment, there's two different kind of avenues for the public comment. The first is the next section right after this, section 4, is public comments non-agenda. That would be for comments that are for anything that is not on the agenda. So if it's related to the post office or to the downtown plaza, we ask that you wait with those comments until we get to those items. But if it's a comment on something that is not on the agenda, that's the opportunity for that. We can take comments through email, and we're monitoring this email box all the time. It is publiccomment@burlingame.org. And then also, Megan, I apologize. Are we using the chat for public comments in this session, or is it just the email?
We'll do chat as well, and I'll forward you any chats I receive.
Okay, thank you. So then once we get to the items themselves, they'll follow a format similar to what we're used to with City Council and Planning Commission meetings. There'll be a presentation by both staff and the relevant project teams, questions to staff and to the project teams, and then an opportunity to take public comment on that particular item. Once the public comment on that particular item is completed, then there can be further discussion. So it's the same kind of format, questions, then comments. And that is my overview. If there are any questions about the format, I'm happy to take them, and otherwise we can move along.
All right, thank you, Director Gardner. The only other thing I wanted to add is if you are one of the panelists and you have, and you're not speaking, it would be helpful if you put yourself on mute, just to make sure that we don't have a lot of background noise. And for members of the public who may be joining by telephone, I do see a few numbers dialing in. When it is appropriate in the meeting agenda where we are offering public comment, if you would like to make a comment, you can hit *9 on your phone, and then we can see you emerging here as someone who would like to participate in the meeting. During the meeting, I'm sort of driving, as sort of the chair of the meeting, I am driving the dialogue, which is going to be challenging because essentially we have not only 5 council members, we've got 7 commissioners, and we have staff. So what I'm doing is watching very carefully along the meeting participant list to see if somebody wants to raise their hand. So thanks for being patient with me, but if you could use the raise hand feature, which if you're looking on your bottom of your screen, participants, there's a raise hand feature. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with this doing Zoom meetings, but that would be very helpful to me. And if for some reason I miss you, you can go ahead and give me a visual or pipe in if needed, okay? But I'll do my best to try to manage the air traffic control as best we can. All right, without further ado, I think it's time to open up to public comments for items that are not on the agenda. So at this point, members of the public can speak about any item that we're not planning to discuss this morning. If you wish to suggest an item for a future council agenda, you can do so during this period. The Ralph M. Brown Act, which is the state and local agency open meeting law, prohibits the city council and the planning commission from acting or deliberating on any matter that is not on the agenda. But at this time, feel free to say any comments on topics that you would like to discuss within our purview, and we will give members of the public 2 minutes at this point to say any non-agenda items. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Madam Mayor, we do have one email which I can read out loud into the record, and then we'll see if other comments come in.
Okay, thank you so much.
This email is signed by Jennifer Foff. Dear Mayor Beach, honorable council members and planning commissioners, thank you all for your hard work and attention to detail to make our city more beautiful and livable. Though it is not agendized topic today, I just wanted to reiterate my ongoing concern about the growing trend of residential projects, typically multi-unit, that involve excavation of a property along its entire length and width for below ground garages, basements, and other purposes. With very few exceptions, complete excavations are permitted under all properties, including single-family residential. They effectively create a void below the city's required surface level setbacks. Why does this matter? As you know, a huge component of Burlingame's successful design review process includes the ability to mitigate impacts of large projects with ample plantings. This is particularly important in many areas where multi-unit structures abut single-family neighborhoods, for example, but also between large single-family homes. That said, a totally excavated property leaves no viable ground to plant anything. In addition, carving away at the edge of a neighbor's property can easily damage established vegetation growing nearby that may have taken decades to grow and is already buffer forming. Planting and raised planters is not planting for the next generation, it is merely decorative. The recent amendments regarding ADU guidelines, including those permitting multiple underground structures, is equally problematic when viewed in this context, as these have the potential of creating large areas of permanent hardscape. Burlingame has been known as the city of trees for well over a century. Trees greatly enhance all projects, contribute to our health and well-being, and the fight against climate change. They need to have sufficient space above and below ground to thrive, to contribute long-term to our city's urban forest. Signed, Jennifer Foff.
Thank you very much, Ms. Foff. We appreciate that. Are there any other public comments that have come in on our email, which members of the public can write public comment at burlingame.org. You can message a chat feature for public comment, or you can hit *9 on your phone and I will call on you. These are non-agenda items. Seeing none.
Mayor Beach, Mike McCord would like to speak.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McCord. You have 2 minutes.
I'm trying to unmute. Have you got me now?
I got you now. All
Okay,
right.
thanks.
Sure.
I was just, first, thanks for the city council to resume their discussion of reach codes. This thing's been kind of going on since last October, as I checked, and I don't think you need another study session. It seemed to me that at the last study session, there was a pretty broad council consensus on the reason for doing these codes and the hope to move towards all electric. And the council is closely divided on some of the exceptions to all electric. And I think it's worth getting something on the books soon, rather than prolonging a dispute over some of these exceptions. I'd like to think that the council could, find a compromise that everybody's comfortable with, and let's get a reach code on the book before another generation of natural gas, space and water heating get built into huge buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McCord. We appreciate your input and your leadership on the Citizens Environmental Council of Burlingame. We really appreciate it. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? Again, these are non-agenda items, so we can't deliberate or discuss them, but we will absolutely listen and consider. Seeing none, Madam City Clerk, any other public comments via email or chat?
None that I see.
Okay, then we are going to move on at this point to our discussion topics. And I'll just remind the panelists, the council members and the planning commissioners, although the public may weigh in on the chat feature, please, all of us refrain from doing so that our conversations and input is fully transparent to the public. Okay, item 5A, community development operations under health order COVID-19. And I'll turn this over to Director Gardner. Thank you. And I think, Kevin, you need to unmute. Thanks.
Thank you. There we go. All right. So for this item, there was not a staff report, mainly because we weren't sure what the latest health officer order would be. But on Wednesday, we did get a new order released. In terms of the planning and building divisions, the most significant change is that the health officer order allows previously approved construction projects to move forward, both residential and commercial. And these are allowed to resume as of this coming Monday, provided the construction safety protocols are followed. And there are different protocols for both small projects and large projects. Small residential projects are defined as 10 units or less. Small commercial projects are defined as 20,000 square feet or less. The protocols are attached to the health officer order, and then we've also posted them on the building division webpage. The question on everyone's mind is when will we begin resuming new building and planning applications, given that City Hall will remain closed through the end of this month, and that the majority of staff are working from home. We're needing to create pretty different new procedures from what we're used to, but we do want to begin accepting new applications. Initially, we had thought that we might be ready to start taking in new building permit applications this coming week. But we've, in coordinating with all the different departments and staff, we believe we need one more week just to get all the pieces in place. So for right now, we're aiming for new submittals in both building and planning starting on May 11th, so a week from Monday. Submittals will be through a combination of email submittals and dropping off plans once arrangements have been made to receive those plans. And we'll update the web pages for both the building and planning divisions as we confirm that date, and also outline the procedures for the submittals themselves. So that's the extent of the update, and I'm available for questions. I'll also note that Ruben Hurin, our planning manager, is also here and is available for questions as well.
All right, thank you for that update. I know these have been concerns for many members of the community, and we appreciate that the city's website has a lot of valuable information for people seeking sort of real-time information to questions, and that staff is available by phone as well. So I do see some questions here from some of our commissioners, and I'd like to start with Commissioner Gall.
Thank you. I was just wondering about permits for what were previously over-the-counter, things like window replacements or bathroom or kitchen remodels that don't require planning review or nothing structural. Is that something that we could look into opening up this coming week?
That was our original plan. We do need a few more days. We need to basically develop a form that outlines the timelines and whether staff can respond to plan checks following our regular timelines, or if we need a waiver, just so people, as they submit an application, are familiar with the turnaround time. So that's why we've needed to put that on hold, is we do need to develop that form. But the intent is to allow building permit submittals that don't require planning approval to be submitted as soon as we can. We initially had hoped that would be this coming Monday, but we do need to get this waiver form in place just to kind of protect everybody and advise people of what the timelines are in terms of everybody being kind of a decentralized plan check right now.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Gall, and let's move on to Commissioner Say.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to know, I'm noticing some cities are moving to a fully online submittal process, and am wondering if we are planning to move in that direction at all going forward, not necessarily, in the next week or two or anything like that, but is it something that the building and planning departments are considering?
I think in the long term that is, and in fact, it was something we were looking at before the whole shutdown and health order and everything. It does take some time to implement those systems, and in particular, just get the right equipment for people to be able to do screen plan checks. So really, you need larger monitors than what most, generally our staff is working from home on laptops. So we would have to get some kind of bigger monitors just so people could see plans on screen. So in order to not further delay, we're still going to be focused on a paper-based system, and that's something we've been working with the different departments to coordinate the review of paper plans. Over the longer term, yeah, we are looking at the different providers for the online submittals and plan checks, and that's something we'll be wanting to do, but that'll be certainly further down the road than the next week or two.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great question. Some of the biggest challenges in COVID-19 are certainly opening up other opportunities like telecommuting and new ways that people haven't done before, but it's I'm glad our department's thinking about innovative ways to help streamline processes for the community. Commissioner Sargent has a question.
Kevin, how long does staff think they're going to be working from home?
It really comes down to, I'm hesitant to even speculate it. It really comes down to what the next phase of the health order is. When does City Hall reopen, and what do we need to do? Do we have to reconfigure staff in terms of, right now we've done a great job of putting a lot of staff into a very small space so that we could accommodate all the people we need to do the work. But then from a social distancing perspective, that's kind of the exact opposite of what we should be doing. So we're really not sure what it's going to look like. Beyond that, I think everybody is eager. It's hard to have a decentralized development review process, and people really miss being able to do that direct coordination that we get in City Hall. So I know everyone's eager to get back, but that is a constraint, as the desks are pretty tightly positioned in the departments right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I see Councilmember Brownrigg has a question.
More by way of a comment. I mean, we are trying our best to keep the wheels moving, right? Kevin, for example, I don't think you mentioned it, but we are trying to do remote inspections and things like that, right? I mean, we are leaning in. We understand how important the construction industry is to many, many people in the city and homeowners who want to get their stuff done, but especially to an awful lot of our workforce is involved in, building and remodeling. So we're really trying our best. And Kevin, maybe you want to talk about some of these other creative ideas that we've done.
Yes, and again, from the perspective of getting the construction crews back to work and such, it was good news in the health order that construction is allowed to resume. It kind of went in different phases. Initially, housing was allowed, and then it was further constrained, and now it's going to be allowed again, provided that the proper public safety protocols are followed. But through all of this, particularly with housing being allowed to be constructed in some shapes or forms, our building inspection staff have been working and developing those alternate inspection procedures. There are ways, so if a project already has its permits, it can continue construction, and our inspectors are able to do their scheduled inspections as they would normally. Procedures are a little different, but the intent has been to basically be as accommodating as we can under what's allowed under the health order, and allow these projects to keep moving along.
And also extend the period for the permits, right? We're going to take care of that as well.
That's something else we're looking at. That probably a kind of blanket extension, given that there's so many permits that are running into timing issues. So we have an approach where we will most likely have a resolution to the Planning Commission later in May for planning approvals to be extended, and then another resolution for the council the following June 1st meeting to extend permits more generally. And with some kind of timeline based on the timing of the health order and both from the county and the state.
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions, and Director Gardner for the insight. I see Commissioner Say, since nobody else has another question, we'll pass it back to you.
Yes, sorry about that. Just in terms of managing expectations, Kevin, just wondering, I'm certain you're going to be experiencing a backlog once you open up again the week out, the May 11th week. Are you going to still be, or I guess the building department, will the building department still be essentially saying about 3 weeks for plan check, or are you going to, both planning and building, I suppose, going to be able to provide some type of timeline for applicants for review or initial review?
That is what we're working on right now, and part of it is this waiver form we want to develop just so people are aware. You know, definitely the intent is to keep up with our customary time frames, but we also need to acknowledge that in some cases that may be easier said than done. So we do need to have an advisory to give people a little better sense of, you know, what are the realistic timeframes for turning around plans. So that's what we'll be putting together over the next week, just so that when people do submit, they have a full understanding of what the timing is and the ability for the city to process applications.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, I think I'll open it up to members of the public who may wish to comment on this matter or have other questions or concerns. So let me ask Director Gardner, do we have any questions on public comment or on the chat?
I am not seeing any on the email, and I don't believe we have any on the chat either.
Okay, and then I'll ask if there's members of the public who are on the telephone. If you would like to comment on this matter, you can hit *9 now, and that will cue me that you have a comment or a question. Seeing none. Okay, I will close public comment with my imaginary gavel. And at this point, we'll have any further closing comments from either members of the council or our planning commission. All right. Thank you so much for the discussion. And thank you for the update, and to your entire, not only the planning department team, building department, certainly public works plays a role in all these kinds of developments. Everybody's been reinventing the way of the world, and we appreciate your hard work, and we appreciate the patience of the public for how we've just needed to reset expectations and work through this. But ultimately, hopefully it will provide even more streamlined service moving into the future. So with that, let's move on to item 5B, which is 220 Park Road, the former post office, an application update. I'll turn it over to Director Gardner for sort of a big picture approach, really to the next two items. But we thought a lot about what would be the most valuable use of time for this meeting, and there's many things we could discuss, but we thought it would be this particular project that's been on the radar for so many years. Council members past and present who have eyed an opportunity once the United States Post Office went on the private market and was purchased, that we want to see some sort of development that honors the historical aspects of the post office, but that provides some real community value, potentially creates a town square right in the heart of our downtown where the former post office was. It's been stalled for a number of years, but most recently, really starting in the early part of 2020, there's been some new life breathed into the project. And many of you may have followed some of our prior council meetings, but this is an opportunity to share with the community how this project is moving forward and quite quickly in the year ahead, and hopefully will provide a little hope and inspiration through sort of a dark time that we're all dealing with as a community. So Director Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor Beach. Just a very short introduction, just to introduce the project and the Ceres Regis and Dostart team. The City Council most recently had a status update presentation on March 2nd, but this is the first chance for the Planning Commission to also start looking at this project. Ultimately, the application will be subject to Planning Commission review, and that includes public hearings as well as an assessment of potential environmental impacts with the project. Concurrent with the proposal for the post office site, the city will also be pursuing design and development of a town square on parking lot E next door, and that's the next item on the agenda. So these two are kind of paired together. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dave Hopkins from Ceres Regis, who will then introduce the rest of his team and provide a presentation.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Good morning, Mayor, City Council, Planning Commissioners. My name is Dave Hopkins. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Ceres Regis Group, and I'm joined by my colleague Andrew Turco. And it's funny with the screen. I know they're all there somewhere. Steve Dostart and Molly Ricker with Dostart Company, and Ted Korth, our building architect, and Marcel Wilson, our landscape architect. So we're all here. I'm going to have to ask, is the presentation teed up, Kevin, on your end?
Yes, I'll share. It's Megan. I'll share it, and then just let me know when you want me to switch slides.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Well, that's getting pulled up. I just want to sort of reinforce what was just talked about and say thank you to the city. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is an amazing opportunity to reinvent one of the most important properties, not just in Burlingame, but on the peninsula. And we understand how many competing priorities there are for your time right now. And I would say the city of Burlingame right now is a leader in terms of what I see you all doing, and we're active in a lot of cities. So I'm comparing you to many within San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. It's very impressive. Second, I just want to reinforce how important this project is to us. And then on a personal level, I live in Burlingame. I've got two boys at Washington Elementary. I walk downtown every day. It's not lost on me or certainly any of our team how important this is to do right. So we're here and very excited to engage today. This is the first time we've had this opportunity with the commissioners. Ceres Regis Group, we're a local development company. We've been developing infill sites on the peninsula, Silicon Valley for about 30 years. We look for downtown locations. We look for transit proximity. We tailor our approach to each site. There's no one size fits all as far as anything we do. In this case, as I think you all know, we've studied multiple land uses and alternatives and landed on a mixed retail and office use. That was the best solution for this particular situation. And I'll walk through how we thought through that. And in coming to that conclusion, we aligned with our friends at Dostart Company, Development Company. They've developed iconic downtown office buildings. And we brought in Ted Korth from Korth Sunseri Hagi, who's got a long track record of designing some of the most memorable downtown office buildings, which really tie in and fit into the fabric of downtowns. In terms of our presentation, I'm going to just go through sort of the evolution of our thought process, hand it to Andrew Turco. He's going to walk through the design, and we've iterated on the design since the latest input we got from the City Council just several weeks ago. We've also had the opportunity to work with staff and the town square architects, who I know will follow us, and members of the Historic Society in town. And as we've moved along, we've really appreciated the engagement of all these collective groups and look forward to continuing to do that. So next slide, please. So very briefly, the location you all know very well. In context, it's so important to reinforce how central it is to the heart of downtown, and that's what's so special. The size of the property, the proximity to the idea of a town square, and its connection really by foot to Caltrain, to Burlingame Avenue, and all of the amenities in this location. Next slide, please. So the way we looked at this, the strength of Burlingame Avenue is really well documented. Everybody understands it. What we have an opportunity to do is pull some of that energy and create another path of travel that doesn't currently exist, but for cars. And one way to take this path, or really one reason to take this path, would be to create a heart or a sort of center of gravity and energy in the town square. We want to make sure that public open space is active all hours of the day. So our driver has really been focused, while we're not designing the town square, its success is paramount to our success. Next slide, please. So there's two sites here. Again, I know that you know this, so I'll be brief, but it's critical that these two work together. Next slide, please. The list of constraints, I'll call them, but also opportunities that we're faced with include several things. So there's a historic building outlined by this slide that we're going to preserve, and that creates a lot of challenges. It's, as you can see, well set back from the frontage on Park and Lorton, and conflicts with a lot of things you could otherwise do with the property. But if done right, and if we can find a way to repurpose this the way we think we will, the opportunities are incredible. And it will frame the town square. It will be there as long as the town square is there. It will become we think the identity really of both the building and the town square. Next slide, please. Then there's critical infrastructure. So, folks probably don't pay too much attention to the fact that there's an underground river pretty much underneath this property, but there is. And what that does is it constrains what you can do on the surface as well as what you can do below ground. You can't excavate right up, you can't move this, let's just put it that way. So it's a fixed constraint. It's been a challenge, I think, for everyone that's looked at this site, but it's something we're well aware of and planning around. Next slide, please. So then there's parking. Now, to do this right, no matter what you do with the building above ground, you need to put the parking underground as much as possible. What that does is constrains you not only from the culvert, but you have groundwater that's relatively shallow, and soil conditions that are just expensive to deal with. So something we're prepared to do. There will be about 280 parking stalls created on the site on 2 levels underneath the post office, with the post office being protected. Next slide, please. So then really the key to everything is the activation. And the retail uses are what are going to accomplish that. On Lorton, we have the opportunity to really fill in a large section of Lorton that currently sits inactive. It's an opportunity to improve sidewalks, to create wider sidewalks, landscape sidewalks, and then have that retail turn the corner into the town square. And on Park, we have the ability to repurpose the post office, as I mentioned before, and it's going to frame the town square. Clearly, we've got a challenging set of circumstances today as it relates to retail, but we all know that this location is going to feed off of Burlingame Avenue's strength, and we all know that's going to return. More importantly is access to parking. There's new parking being built, as we know, on Lorton on the other side of Howard, but we also anticipate 280 parking stalls from our property being available to the public to use on weekdays after 5 o'clock and on weekends. So folks coming to shop and to enjoy the town square are going to engage with it instantly because they'll actually park adjacent to or underneath it. We'll also have 300 to 400 employees above in the office building above, which will clearly activate the town square and support merchants throughout downtown during the weekdays. Next slide, please. And then there's sunlight. So one of the really great outcomes of the covenant to protect the historic building is it pushes massing back away from Park, which allows the sunlight to hit the town square, where we think it probably will become the most of the real critical aspect of the town square, closest to Park throughout the day. So that's a very important aspect of comfort that we believe is a real opportunity. Next slide, please. So then in terms of how we thought through the massing, I'll call it the density and the proposal we came up with, we were balancing like a developer must, the costs of constructing parking, preserving structures, creating retail, contributing to the town square, which is very important. We needed to create enough density to do that. So the first step is what's allowable. There's an existing general plan and specific plan, and projects have been developed underneath that. And then how do we preserve our ability to move quickly? I think it's a fairly universal desire to see this project move as quickly as possible. So in terms of what is allowable, if you take the existing specific plan apply the development plan standard, the development standards. You look at 225 California, other recently developed office projects in downtown since the specific plan. You essentially can build a 55-foot tall box-ish structure to the property lines. Of course, in our situation where you're protecting a historic structure, that's not possible. But the city's municipal code has a plan for this, and that allows flexibility of development standards where historic preservation occurs. So that was really thought through proactively. And we started to look at height as an opportunity here, understanding very clearly there's a limit. In considering the speed, we looked at really the capacity of office development left in the specific plan, such that the environmental review that's been completed covered what we plan to do. And we don't need to go through an extensive environmental review process associated with exceeding what was previously studied. That kicked out a number of about 140,000 square feet, which is what we've opted to limit our proposal to. So next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. This is a fun photo of the post office in October of 1941, but he's going to walk you through our building design and site design.
Thanks, Dave. So I'll jump in right here. Dave covered a lot of the constraints that exist on the site, and it started.
Andrew, it's hard to hear you.
Oh, thank you. Are you guys able to hear me now?
Better.
All right, let me try to play my volume. Sorry about that. So Dave laid out some of the constraints that made it a bit challenging to start working through the design of the site. But what I want to start walking through now is we took these as opportunities to be creative. I'll echo what Dave said in the fact that the municipal code allowing for some flexibility in the case of a historic building being in place and the desire to preserve that. To us, that was an opportunity to be creative. We started taking a look at this site and thinking, what can we do to really highlight and bring the post office building to the forefront of our plan, where we're not competing with it, we're actually complementing it. And what can we do in other ways on the rest of the site to address it? Next slide, please. So we started looking around downtown and we started thinking, what makes a rich urban fabric? What brings some of the vibrancy to downtown Burlingame and to Burlingame Avenue in particular? And part of what brings some of that vibrancy and that organic interest to downtown is diversity of heights. So we started looking around, and there's actually a fair number of examples of buildings in Burlingame that exceed what would otherwise be built on the height, and then other areas where there are buildings that are significantly lower that what would be allowed under the current zoning. And we started looking, is there a way that we could start to take that same concept on a grand scale and throughout Burlingame and think about it on our site, where we actually have a diversity of heights, that some that peak up above and some that stay really low that are fronting the street, and create that interest on the site. Next slide, please. So we came up with a concept of an average height across the building. So rather than having what Dave showed earlier, which was just what we call kind of the extruded box, 0 lot line setback, capped at the 55-foot height limit, really no interest as you walk around the building other than just a flat facade. How can we start thinking about, could we actually shape the massing so we create this sense of tiering, so we create these diverse levels of height as we move around the site? And so what's showing on the screen right now is just a kind of a plan view to the council members and mayor, vice mayor. You'll all be familiar with this from our presentation last time. But really what it conveys is how, if you look on the Park Road frontage, which is the bottom of the plan showing up above, there's pretty generous setbacks of ground level of a lawn that sets back that historic entry that we wanted to make sure we preserve, that sense of arrival that exists right now in the post office. And then you get to the post office building itself, highlighted in orange. Post office building, it's a one-story building, has a nice generous setback. It doesn't really want to be encroached on. It doesn't want to have something that's right up over it or that's right up to the edge of it. So we wanted to make sure we set that back generously as well. And then thinking about how we can start introducing terracing and building setbacks on the building behind that we're proposing to construct, so that it slowly just steps back from that area. And as you can see, the big green patch towards the bottom left of the image is the town square, and thinking about how we can also start setting these heights and this articulation back from that town square. So it almost feels framed in a comfortable way, but doesn't feel imposed on. Next slide, please. And what that really resulted in, we think, is certainly one back, please. Sorry, a ground plane that's really more interesting and more diverse than would otherwise be created with just a simple build out under the existing zoning. So retail activation set back from Park and along the town square, an elevated terrace. One of the other constraints is that the actual post office floor is about 4 feet off the ground elevation. And so some way to bridge from that interior space down to the town square. Retail on Lorton, especially at that corner where it's facing towards Burlingame Avenue to really draw people into the site. And then parking, which would be used for office use during the day, but which we're offering for evening and weekend parking for the public to support patrons who are shopping downtown in Burlingame Avenue, who are maybe getting a dinner in town, et cetera. And then a pedestrian cut through passageway to better link the circulation from pedestrian experience around town. Next slide, please. So what we showed last time were the starts of our conceptual thinking. These watercolor images, this one being a view from Park Road, really foregrounding the historic elements of the post office, using the architecture of the post office as inspiration of almost an Art Deco expression, really vertical columns, elegant window framing that sets back on the building behind, but really isn't trying to compete with it. You can see the introduction of terraces up on the upper level, the hints of green, where there's additional setbacks, and where you'd have visual interest not only in the horizontal plane, but also on the vertical plane. And you can start to see how the activation of the town square next to it really starts to integrate with the post office. They become almost unified sites in some way. Next slide, please. Then on the backside on Lorton, this is the side where we had previously pushed a lot of the new office construction with the intent that we're really respecting the historic post office and the town square. At the same time, we wanted to be respectful of what we're proposing on Lorton as well. And so we looked around at some of the other contextual buildings on Lorton, and we saw a pretty consistent 2-level architectural expression for the retail uses on that street that connect Howard and Burlingame Avenue. And so what we wanted to do was set the building back, the upper floors back, so that from a pedestrian perspective or even a vehicle perspective, you're really experiencing almost a retail pavilion that sets forward and sits proud of the rest of the building. And the rest of the building recedes somewhat up to the background. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much how we had started thinking conceptually of how we wanted to lay out the site. And what we heard last time when we've gone through 2 city council study sessions at this point was an interest in studying the Lorton Avenue facade a little further and seeing if there was opportunity for further refinement, potentially seeing if there was an opportunity to study the perceived heights a little bit. I think there was a reception to the creativity of a diversity of heights, but also to still be aware of how that's perceived. And then next steps on town square. I mean, that's the centerpiece that really makes this whole area vibrant and starts to pull people down in conjunction with this building. And I know Urban Field and SWA will touch on that right after us. Next slide, please. So we started taking a look at the Lorton Avenue facade, and we thought, okay, what can we do to the retail pavilion, that retail expression that will really integrate it and make it feel like an enrichment to this street? Next slide, please. We took our inspiration from Burlingame Avenue. We started looking at the architectural expressions up and down the street, and we noticed, especially top left, this is the lower portion of the Masonic building, right on Burlingame Avenue, right at the end of Lorton Avenue, essentially between Lorton and California Ave. It's really this strong expression on the first 2 levels of an increase of texture in the windows expressions, in the bays, in the columns. And then there's sometimes buildings that are up above those 2 levels that kind of recede from view and are seen more from the distance. And we started, as we looked, we saw this in many of the examples that we saw from Burlingame Avenue. Next slide, please. So we thought, how do we plug a gap right now that almost exists because of the post office building and because it's currently especially even more so fenced off and unused right now between Burlingame Avenue and Howard Avenue? And we actually realized this was an opportunity to plug a gap in the pedestrian experience that's actually been missing for many, many years, and create that vibrancy. So for a pedestrian walking down the sidewalk, there's interest as one walks down the street. There's texture as one walks down the street. There's something that keeps compelling and pulling you further down and better links Howard Avenue and Burlingame Avenue. Next slide, please. So we put our architects to task, and they stepped up to the challenge and really started thinking through what can we do on that expression to break down the perceived length, to increase the perceived texture, to lower the perceived height of this area, and to really activate this street. And so this is the first that we're sharing of this refined and evolved proposal. What we've done is we've first thought about how do we break up the different programmatic uses of this facade and show that through the architecture. So on the side that's closest to us, just to orient everyone, this is looking down Lorton towards Burlingame Ave. The side closest to us, this is the entrance for the public parking on evenings and weekends. It's the area where we can have some of the back of house services provided hidden behind the facade for the retail and restaurant uses that we're proposing for the rest of the site. And thinking about, could we think of this building as almost a reinterpreted service or auto type historic building? Moving down towards more of the retail uses, how do we take some of that language from Burlingame Avenue and create those strong sense of retail entries with glass surrounding the individual doors to those spaces, awnings that denote different uses within inside, blade signs that continue to pull people down, a strong cornice line that really frames this view. And then as you can see, the building up above starts to step back out of view a little bit more so that at ground level, you're not really perceiving the building. One of the other things that we did here, which is actually shown in this image, is thinking if we could take the top level of the Lorton facade and actually step it back further so that perceptually at ground level, as you can see here, you see the hint of the terrace on the top floor, but the actual building mass essentially disappears. It's perceptually invisible at this level. Next slide, please. So we looked at how we could make this retail section a little bit more of a retail pavilion, something that activates the street a little bit more interestingly. Then we took a look at the overall building facade, and we thought, how do we reduce that sense of length, of height, scale it and break it down, texture it. Next slide, please. And so we started thinking, how could let's try to use some of the setbacks in order to further articulate and tier that side. So where we previously had a setback above the 2-level retail space over on the left-hand side of the screen, we decided to increase the setback there. So it sets back even further from the retail spaces below. Then we looked at the top floor and we thought, we had a setback facing the town square, but that's really at the center of the site. So could we actually swap where the setback and the terrace is there? So you can see at the top floor on the left-hand side, we've actually pushed that top floor inbound. So it's not really that visible. And in exchange, pushed it out a little bit towards the center of the site. And then even on the Park Road site, whereas previously we were pulling back as much as possible, we thought, let's be really judicious. Let's look at where those setbacks would be most impactful and actually push that forward a little bit towards Park Road. You can see in the diagram right here, it's still pretty deeply set back from Park Road. The post office still really sits forward in that expression over there. We're constrained by the historic covenant that's in place by the building and Secretary of Interior standards in terms of respecting and setting back from that historic building. So it's never really, even with these changes, encroaching too much. But I think what we wanted to present today was a little bit of the balance and the options that we heard the comments from last time about the Lorton Avenue facade needing some further refinements, and this is what we want to propose. Next slide, please. So you can see these are side by side. The image on the left is essentially back one, please. A SketchUp rendering of the design that we had presented last time at City Council in watercolor form. We further refined it. We got to this, and then you can see the image on the right, how we've now started articulating. And the one other thing I want to mention is just we're calling it almost the central waterfall feature, or the recess in the center of the upper floors as well. That puts an additional indentation in the building so that essentially, as one's looking down that facade, there's also that perceptual break in the length of the facade. Next slide, please. Then equally important was as we round the building. So just to orient everyone, this is a view from the future town square. Obviously, a lot of people walking around in a flat green plane, and we're excited to see what goes in there. But really think about also how we can start anchoring this interior corner on the plaza side for the pedestrian entry and the pedestrian access to the public parking there. We see this as a really good opportunity to anchor the site, to anchor the uses in the town square and to create that connectivity and linkages within the site out to Lorton and Park respectively. Next slide, please. And then finally, fully rounding the building back over to the Park Road side, you can see even with these modifications, continuing to step the building back and tier it. Over on the very left-hand side, introducing a setback from what we're calling the Paseo or the Lot E side to bring that building back. We've continued to refine the architecture a little bit, looking at adding some fine-grained texturing in the form of fluting within the columns, refining our cornices within the building, just so that it all ties together as a coherent whole. And one of the things we heard last time was, height's important. Let's be flexible. Let's be creative. And so in that vein, we also took another look at our structural system and saw were there any other opportunities that we could pull some height out of the floor ceiling assembly. And so although it may not be easy to perceive from this image itself, we were actually also able to pull about 6 inches out of each floor height as well as a result of switching from a proposed steel to concrete structural system that just brings the overall building down just a little bit further as well. And so Dave, I think is just going to touch real quick on some of the uses here.
I can jump in. I think we should pivot towards questions. I mean, we couldn't be more excited about where we are. We think this is it's a beautiful building that doesn't compete with the architecture of the post office. It complements it, and likewise with the downtown. We've spent a lot of time and energy on this to this point, and have had a lot of fun doing it. And so I think we've got representatives, like I said earlier, from the design team as well as development team, and we're happy to address any questions.
Dave, can I just add a couple things? This is Steve Dostart. We want you to know that we want this building to feel like it was designed entirely to be in this downtown. We didn't take this look from anywhere else. We looked at your downtown. I spent a lot of time with it. My girlfriend lives in Hillsborough. We're down there a lot. We want it to feel like it could have been built 100 years ago in your downtown. And we really thought about it. The part of the building that's retail emulates another building on Broadway, or Brilliant Game Ambi, excuse me. And there's a lot of thought. There's a lot of articulation. Andrew did a beautiful job taking you through it. There's another terrace on the 6th floor that's off the plaza. We really wanted to balance the building between kind of masculine and feminine feel. We wanted it to feel approachable, something you could relate to, something that is both the center of the downtown and also on a park, on a plaza. So this is something we've taken very, very personally, and we just want you to know we feel it at that level. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Ceres Regis extended team for the presentation and the care that you've brought forth. Before we open it up to questions, I'm going to ask one kind of big picture question to Director Gardner, because I think this will help direct the conversation. We have 7 incredibly talented and expert planning commissioners. We've got 5 very highly engaged city council members who have seen versions of this evolution. The council's seen 2 other study sessions. This is the first look for the commissioners. Can you help the members of the public and our city team understand, Director Gardner, process moving forward so that the public understands what the public process will be on approving these plans, and what would be most helpful kinds of questions and comments for this particular meeting? Because if we really engage in a lot of details that might be better spent at a planning commission meeting or other sorts of policy at the council level, help us understand the process and what would be most helpful to get from this body right now. So thank you, Director Gardner.
Yes, so, this is, it's an introduction to the Planning Commission. It's not really meant to be a design review meeting. So I think it is a big picture discussion. I know Ceres Regis has, and Dostart have been very interested in engaging with the community, and that's partly why we wanted to have this item on the joint meeting agenda. we've been kind of constrained by having to do virtual meetings. I think there's probably interest on the project team to do more community engagement outside of public hearings, and that could be a suggestion if either council members or commissioners have suggestions for further community engagement just on this project. In terms of the more formal process, as a development project, it would go through the Planning Commission first. There's generally a couple of meetings. There's a design review study meeting where there would be more time to have a more detailed discussion on the design, give some direction back to the project. Tied in with that is the framing of the environmental review and identifying issues that would be pertinent to that aspect of the project. And then in the future, after that first study meeting, there would be a public hearing later with the Planning Commission, which at that point, the Planning Commission could take action on the project. And then whether there may be elements of the project that still would need to go to City Council, depending on relationship with the city parking lot next door. So that much we'd still need to figure out. But so there's really two tiers. There's a public hearing process through the Planning Commission, and then there could be other. I think the interest is for other suggestions for community engagement. And just in terms of this morning, I'm kind of looking at the clock and being respectful of people's time. So what I would suggest is this item could go till about 10:30 in terms of questions and comments. There will be many more questions and comments that can't be covered in that time, but this is not the only time this project will be looked at. So we could use that as a kind of planning exercise, and then that still gives us enough time for the next few items as well.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, Director Gardner, and I'll do my best to keep the time limits. And then actually, Mr. Hopkins, if you had one big picture question for you, your big picture vision for timeline on this project that we should all be, as a community, be sensitive to. Could you just enlighten us a little bit what your vision is for approval in a perfect world? Of course, we live in COVID-19, so that's something to consider. But if you could just elaborate on that very briefly.
Yeah, sure. I think we were on a track to complete, within this calendar year pre-COVID, and that's, by virtue of doing this, we still have a chance. I think, the fact that you, like I said earlier, are continuing to have these discussions and move projects forward. We feel like this is still very achievable. So haven't had this conversation with Kevin in detail yet, but that would be our goal.
Okay, thank you for that insight. So I'm going to open it up to questions first from members of the commission and the council. Then we'll move to public comment, and then by 10:30 we'll have everybody summarize. We'll come back before 10:30 and have anybody who wants to make any final comments as well. I'm going to start with Commissioner Turones. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, knowing that this will move forward and come before the commission a little bit more formally, I'll try and keep my comments relatively high level. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was really helpful and informative. It appears to me that the site planning, the massing, the program is definitely headed in a good direction. So my comments would just be in terms of the architecture, and again, not to be too detailed, but I read that the Marina Middle School was referenced previously. Steve, you mentioned that there's a hope, a desire that this could look like it's was built 100 years ago. I guess I want to say that in regards to architecture like the Marina Middle School, that's sort of a time capsule of architecture. It's that 1930s government deco that's kind of set in a particular time. What I would encourage, if not request, is that the architects have some freedom and license to still revisit the architecture or continue to evolve the architecture, let's put it that way, so that it still has a feel of freshness and excitement. In other words, I think it would be entirely possible to give some relief to the, and I know we're looking at preliminary sketches and renderings, but again, trying to get in at the early stages and make these comments to give encouragement. I would hope that the large swaths of the pillar and void sort of curtain wall that we're seeing can be given some relief with other other aspects of architecture. Perhaps that waterfall feature that was mentioned in areas like that could be visited to again make sure that the architecture is still not just timeless, but also fresh and exciting, and isn't just a swath of you know, I don't know what the right phrasing is, because I don't want to be negative, because I'm really excited for what we're seeing, but not just a swath of something that is a backdrop to the historic post office. I mean, I'm all, as anybody may know, I'm all for historic preservation. I'm all for paying homage to what is there now in terms of the post office. But again, I would like I would hope that the architecture could also include, you know, areas of freshness and encouragement. I would suggest that the architects, you know, as an example, they could look at some of the early works of Cohen, Pedersen, Fox that had very historic and classically driven underlying vocabulary, but was still fresh and exciting. So those would be my comments at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Taronis. We'll move to Commissioner Loftus.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I'm very excited about this project as well. And my sense, knowing Commissioner Taronis and what I heard him say, my sense is that he's responding in the same way that I am. I've got a slightly different take on it. Urban design is sort of my thing. I thrive on urban design and spend a lot of time doing urban design in various cities. And so I want to take a big step back. One can talk about projects like this as, you know, you can talk about the forest or you can talk about the trees. And the presentation was great, by the way. What I heard was a lot of talk about the trees, meaning the details of the building, the architectural moves, we would call them. This does this, this steps back. But what I heard about the forest, the big picture, stepping way back, is we want to highlight the post office. Yeah, there's no way around that. I wish the post office, frankly, were a better building. It's not that good a building. I know that's almost blasphemy. It's old, you know, it's of a period, but it's not a great building. But you know, you can't do anything about that. So highlighting the post office. I heard it said that we want to make this building perceptually invisible. This is a problem for me because you can't make this building go away, right? It's just too big. And I heard we want to make it look like it was built 100 years ago. Well, if it were built 100 years ago, it wouldn't be this big, for one thing. So that's a problem. That's a challenge, to take a building this big and place it in an urban setting like this and try to make it go away. In a big city, what you would do in this situation is you would make this a background building. This thing would fade into the background of a bunch of other big buildings, and then you could make it go away. But this is not going to happen in downtown Burlingame. And so I'm coming at this sort of like Commissioner Taronis, I think. If you can't make it go away by making it a really, really simple building that fades into all the other simple buildings, and you can't make it go away because it's too big, then my sense is that this building needs to be more figural. The freshness, the excitement, something needs to go on this building that makes it special. And it doesn't pretend to be built 100 years ago, because we live in the 21st century. And I'm not saying make it hyper modern or anything, but I think the building needs to be more figural. It needs to be a landmark building instead of fading into the background, which it can never do in this setting. It may fade into the background when the city's built up in another 100 years, but it's not going to do it for a long time. And that's like 225. 225 California cannot fade into the background. It pretends to be a simple urban building in a urban fabric that's not there yet. So the building stands out. And this is going to have some of the same challenges. I think it's going to be a great project, and everything I heard said about what happens at the street level and the retail, that all makes perfect sense. It's exactly the right thing to do. but the building itself can never be made to go away by doing that stuff. If you're standing right in front of that retail, yeah, you'll not see the big building, but the building is perceived from many other vantage points and many other distances. So I'll leave it at that. I think it's a really exciting project, but I wouldn't try to make this building go away, and I certainly wouldn't make it historic. I don't think that's the right thing to do, personally. That said, we don't want, I worry a little bit about, as much as I like Redwood City, I worry a little bit about this building looking like it's in Redwood City or another mid-peninsula downtown. So I look forward to seeing it again. It's very exciting. And thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Loftus. We'll move on to Chair Say. And then after Chair Say, we'll have Commissioner Camerado.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I'm super excited about this project coming to fruition and becoming reality, hopefully sooner than later. I'm going to step back from kind of the architectural elements, but really wanted to bring up some more community engagement elements to the whole site and use of it beyond the retail and office space that is planned for the town square area. For one, I wanted to see if maybe you could think about kind of not necessarily a clock tower or anything like that, but something that adds some some unification element that really it defines itself as the center of Burlingame and as a town square. And I kind of think of a clock tower of some sort or a clock. Another thing that I'm interested in seeing is how we kind of use the space around the town square as it interfaces with the building in the evenings potentially. Let's say in the sense of a stage for a band to play in the evening, or for some type of big presentation, speeches, a gathering space for some type of big presentation. So a podium, if you will, of some sort. And another thing I'm thinking about is there an opportunity for the rental of any of the spaces for events? A dance event, some big party, or just a gala of sorts, something like that. I'm kind of seeing I'm not sure what's happening along the left side of the post office, those beautiful windows along the left side. I'm imagining kind of a San Francisco's Ferry Building in kind of some kind of interfacing and interplay. I'm not sure if there's plans that you can go inside, like those are doors to enter that marble hall, but just trying to bring up some additional ideas for thought in terms of engaging the building directly with the spaces outside and how we could use it in ways beyond the function of an office and a retail space. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a great presentation. I'm really excited.
Thank you, Chair Say. We'll move to Commissioner Camerado, and I'm not rushing anybody. It is 10:15 and we have at least 3 more commissioners and a council member who'd like to comment, and we'll make sure we have room for public comment as well. So Commissioner Camerado, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you so much for your presentation. The history of the post office is pretty unique. Back in the day when I was a little girl, the post office was a place where the children from the different schools could place artwork, and people could go when they were going to the post office, see the artwork for the different schools. So it would really be cool if there was an opportunity to try to create some sort of art or mural or something to engage the children in the schools, to try to keep that history going if that's possible. It was just really nice when we were little that we could do something, and then the kids had field trips and would go to the post office and see their art displayed. The other thing that I was kind of thinking of is the old garden center. So the garden center on Chapin was an amazing piece of property that, and I can't remember the address. I know it's like 14, I think it's 1427 Chapin. But what they did is they took the old garden center, they kept the beautiful history of that building, but then they did create something completely different and more on the modern side. I'm not saying you go modern, but just take a look at the garden center. I think that's a really good, they used that property and that they left the history and added some really cool elements to it. Much smaller scale, very different, but kind of that sense. And those are my only comments, but I thank you for your time and all the work you've done on this, and very excited. One other thing that I was also thinking of was the ferry building, kind of that open closed concept for the outside farmers market, so that people could really kind of enjoy being enclosed if it's raining or open or something. And I know we have the culvert and we have other issues there, but maybe something of that sort. So thank you again, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Commissioner Camarado, and we appreciate the native perspective and memories on it too. It's a great insight. We'll move to Commissioner Sargent.
Well, thanks very much, guys. This is a terrific presentation. It's really exciting, and I really look forward to having Saris Regis as a partner for the city. I think it's going to be a great project. The only question I had was related to the culvert. I know we're stuck with it, and I'm wondering if there's any opportunity, or if you've given any thought to whether that can be opened up, at least in a small section, to kind of create a more, kind of soften the urban landscape in there. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Commissioner Sargent. We appreciate the question. We'll pass that forth to the Saris Regis team.
Yeah, it hasn't been looked at. We've seen it opened up. The hatch there in the parking lot, when it's pulled open, is an opportunity to look in there. It's not a really good opportunity, I think. Theoretically, it's a cool idea. I don't think it would be practical though, but we did think about it.
I would just add that it would take away from the ability to use your town square. It would really eliminate it as the utility of using it. It would cut right through the middle of it. So that's it would be hard to make pretty because it's concrete, and then you wouldn't really be able to use it very much. So, anyway.
Thank you very much. I do see, I was going to move to Commissioner Gall, but I do see our city attorney has a comment. And when the city attorney raises her hand, I usually let her speak. So Madam City Attorney.
That may be more authority than I should be vested with on a Saturday morning, but I just wanted to comment that while that's a great idea, I think our engineering department has pretty strict limitations on how that culvert needs to operate. And I would be surprised if, based on prior conversations with them about it, including in prior iterations of this project, I think that opening it is probably not a viable alternative, although it would be lovely to have some sort of channel running through the public space there. I don't think it's something that we can make happen, unfortunately.
Thank you. Appreciate the question, Commissioner Sargent, though, because I think probably members of the community were wondering that too. We'll move to Commissioner Gall and then followed by Councilmember Brownrigg. And then if no other questions, I'll just make sure any commissioners or council members don't have questions, and then we'll move to the public. So Commissioner Gall.
Thank you. First of all, I'm impressed that we got through our 3 architects on the commission and we still have some time left to talk. But and thank you for the presentation. I think it was great. My question, more than a comment, goes back to the site development. And I know that I don't know how it all evolved, but one of my concerns is the back of the buildings on Burlingame Avenue. And I didn't know if that was going to be dealt with simply on the plaza development, or if there had been thought given to another row of buildings there that would essentially create a service alley, giving some more retail space to the plaza. Of course, it would probably mean taking something off of the main building, but it might help to reduce the mass of that. That's my only question.
I'll just interject. I apologize just in that part of that is hold that thought until the next item, because that is something that the Plaza project is looking at. But I apologize, I interrupted.
I just didn't know if that would be part of the development of the larger building or the retail space. So, okay, I'll wait for the next session.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Gall. I do see that Councilmember Brownrigg has a question.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. So thanks very much for the comments. I do think this is incredibly important, and probably later on I might speak about some of the history here of how close we are to achieving a goal that this community envisioned over 10 years ago. So super excited about that, excited to have the conversation about the urban square, which comes next and is really, you know, the yin and yang of this project. But I did want to just quickly ask Commissioners Loftus and Toronis, you know, what I think I heard you say, and not to turn this into a planning commission meeting, is that the massing is okay. It's the vocabulary of the building that you'd like to see some changes to. I'd like to just make sure that's what I heard. Again, without turning this into a planning commission meeting, I think at this point, massing and scale is an important concept to make sure we're on the same page on.
And so what I would like to ask is maybe have Commissioner Toronis respond to that right now, and then we'll move back to other questions just so we keep the train of the conversation. So Commissioner Toronis, would you like to speak to that?
Yes,
First?
yes, Mike, that's where I'm at on it. You know, I know we're at the early stages, but what I would say is similar to what Commissioner Loftus was saying earlier, not to steal his response, but, and I've often said it before, a good urban architecture can be 2 and 3 stories at the street, maybe even 4 stories at the street, and it's a good pedestrian experience. And it really doesn't matter what happens behind and above that, as long as that's good architecture. So yes, I think programmatically massing and site planning, from a site planning standpoint, I think we're headed in a good direction.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Commissioner Loftus, do you have anything different or important to add to that?
No, I think I agree with Commissioner Toronis. I just like to see the mass of the building that can't be made to go away, not try to pretend to go away.
Okay, thank you so much, both of you, for the comments and for being succinct as well, so we keep to our time. I do see we have one more commissioner, Commissioner Schmidt, who would like to comment, and Vice Mayor would like to comment. Let's start with our commissioner. Commissioner Schmidt, welcome to the Planning Commission. We're delighted to have you, and please offer your questions.
Thank you. I don't have any questions per se, but just on this particular topic here, I think the scale and the massing looks great. I agree that I don't know that we have to stick to a 40s vocabulary. I think that we are addressing the historic nature of the post office in this project, but I think I would like to see the architect have a little bit more freedom to not try and match an old town look, but have some ability to keep us moving in the future. And I agree, the building's not going to go away. It's going to be a good mass that we're going to have for a while. And I think we're going to want to make it look good and be contemporary and be looking to the future as much as it looks to the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schmidt, for the comment. I'm going to have open up to Vice Mayor O'Brien to speak, and then if there's no other comments from the panelists or our commissioners or council members, we'll open it up to the public. So Vice Mayor O'Brien, welcome.
I just had just a comment, really. I do agree that you don't really want a building that blends with the street. I think we have to remember that actually this is really a destination place. We want to incorporate a town square, and so there are going to be a lot of people that we want to drive to that area. And so I do think this is going to be more of a prominent building rather than a building that blends. So I just want you to keep that in mind. I don't mind it being a traditional look with maybe a modern flair. So I think there's a way that you can incorporate 2 types of architecture into one building. I think the aspect of the ferry building is actually kind of a cool idea. It's historic, yet it incorporates modern synergy. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. I think it was Commissioner Camarado mentioned a mural. In one of those slides, there was a mural. So my question was, are you actually incorporating a mural? And if so, you may want to think about actually taking that old picture of post office and putting it in color as a mural with that building. But overall, I'm actually really excited about this building and moving forward.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I do see Councilmember Ortiz has a comment or a question before we open up to the public. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My comment is I just really appreciate what you've done on the Lorton side. That was my biggest concern. I think that some of the setbacks and the waterfall feature looks great. I really appreciate that. I think that we're taking a really good step forward. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. I don't see any other questions from commissioners or council members, so I'm going to open it up to the public. And if I'm sorry.
Emily, could I ask a question for the development team? Because
Sure.
so we've been assuming that the town wanted a more historic building. What I've been hearing is perhaps while it might have historic roots, it wants to be a forward-looking building. I mean, there's a lot of opinions, but I'm trying to find a way to say it in one, and I think the Vice Mayor said it the best. I'd just love to hear if that's maybe a consensus that we can build around, so we're not whack-a-moling, you know, in the different directions.
I'm seeing head nods. Am I seeing general head nods? Because I could open it up for a whole bunch of comment. And again, I think we're going to have differing opinions, but that's the general consensus that I feel I heard as well.
You're going to make Ted Korth very, very happy.
Okay.
He's our architect, yeah.
If any members strongly object, whether it's council or commissioners, you'll have opportunities to write in, and then the project team has to synthesize all of this as well. Let's go ahead because it's 10:29 and it's my job to try to keep us on task as much as possible. We'll open it up to members of the public who may have comments on this. We're going to limit everybody due to our agenda to 2 minutes. So if you have comments and you're calling by phone, you can hit *9 and I'll call on you. We'll also check the public comment at burlingame.org. You can write in there, or you can write in on chat and then our staff will let us know you're there. So Director Gardner, do we have members of the public who wish to speak?
There are no emails in the public comment at burlingame.org email box. If the city clerk could confirm if we have any requests through the chat.
None.
Okay.
And I just also wanted to just note, I know it's hard to see in the screen. I saw Councilmember Colson was waving her hand. So maybe
Okay.
after public comment, if she could.
I'm sorry. Absolutely. I'll let you. I didn't see a hand raised, but I will. I'm sorry. I couldn't see all the Brady Bunch on the screen, but we'll make sure you're first in the chute after public comment, but let's just stand by. We'll give everybody just another second in case they wrote into public comment or they want to raise *9 on the telephone. I don't see anybody. So with that, Madam City Clerk, if you concur with me, we'll go ahead and close public comment.
Yep.
And we'll let Councilmember Colson have the first opportunity to have a closing summary or statement. Thank you. Or ask any questions you may have.
No, I just wanted to really just thank Saris Regis for their thoughtful interpretation and handling of the historic post office. It's not, as was mentioned earlier by some of the planning commissioners, it's not the easiest architecture to work off of with the Spanish eclectic style and incorporating something, but I do know that this post office is an important, it's an important historic element to the downtown that a lot of the public cares about. So just thank you for being so, handling it so well.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Colson. And Councilmember Brownrigg, a quick closing comment?
Thanks. It's actually a comment and a question. So comment in terms of, architecture and things, I understand we're not going into a planning commission right now, but it would be a mistake in my judgment if this became all glass, for example, or it became like stucco with multicolored stucco panels like you see in Redwood City. Like I think that, so I'm all for freshening up a classic design, but to the earlier question, I think it fails if it becomes all glass. So that's more of a personal comment. My question is this. So I understand from sidebar conversations that one of the ways we make this happen is we may wind up moving. This is probably for Dave Hopkins. We wind up moving the post office while we excavate underneath it, and then we move it back. Have I got that right, Dave? And if so, I have a quick follow-up question.
Yeah, that is correct. So the safest methodology to preserve the post office structure that we need to preserve when we are providing the parking we're providing underneath it is to move it. It's a very common practice with historic structures. We've got a contractor that's done the structural evaluation of how to make that happen. We will need to talk to the city about potentially using some space for that purpose for the time we'll need it moved. But yeah, that is correct.
So here's my question, which is I'm going to leave unanswered. Like, I don't actually think it should be answered, but the question is this: if you can move it, which it never occurred to me given how heavy it is and how thick the concrete is, that gives you the opportunity presumably to move it back into a slightly different position on the site. And in particular, the lawn that's on Park is kind of a weird space and a weird amount of space. And so the question for the Planning Commission and for Saris is whether it would make the design better if you put it back in a slightly different place, pulling it slightly forward to Park. And I'm going to just leave that as a question. Thank you.
And we'll leave that as a rhetorical question unless anybody from Saris Regis has a final comment on that. No. I see, before I close this up, I do see City Attorney Kane.
Yeah, I just wanted to just make sure that the public understands, because I know Councilmember Brownrigg is very familiar with it, that the historic covenant on the post office requires that not only that the Park Road facade be maintained, but that its relationship to Park Road be maintained as well. So while there may be some adjustments around the edges that would still fulfill that mandate, it's something that the project would have to look at very carefully in terms of what the covenant requires. And it's worth discussing, but it's something that would be an additional layer of analysis. It's not something that they're just free to do.
Right, the city's the keeper of the covenant, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right, yeah. And the public also has input into that and has oversight of it as well directly. So it's just something that would have to be navigated. And I didn't want, I know that your Councilmember Brownrigg was very involved in helping draft that covenant. So I know you're very familiar with those issues, but the public may be less so. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yep. Thank you, Madam City Attorney. Appreciate that. Well, with that, we still have a lot to talk about with the post office on the next agenda item. But what I hope as members of the public who are watching with us today or are watching the recording see the incredible value that our 7 planning commissioners contribute to projects like this. There's a lot of expertise, a lot of historical knowledge, a lot of passion. I want to thank Saris Regis team and the extended team for just proposing a very exciting project. The theme that was common when this came to City Council in January, and I believe February or March, we said, please build us a legacy project that is one for the ages. And I think we are absolutely on the right track. So thank you so much for your partnership. And with that, I think we'll move on at 10:35. We're just 5 minutes behind our target, but let's move on to part 5C, which is a continuation of this discussion as we discuss the public open space in the town square, which is city-owned property, but the synergy between these 2 parcels and how they need to interact with one another are essential, that they're thought of cohesively. So I'll turn it over to Community Development Director Gardner again to introduce this one.
Thank you, Mayor Beach. Concurrent with the proposal for the post office, and as Councilmember Brownrigg mentioned, kind of the yin and the yang, the city will be pursuing the design and development of a town square on parking lot E. The city has retained Urban Field Studio team to lead this effort. The project's just now starting, so this is really the kickoff. And Urban Field will be laying out some of the concepts that the community might want to consider for a town square, and even some of the approaches towards a town square. We'd also like suggestions for how to engage input from the community, particularly in that these few months where we are constrained with having in-person meetings, but we also want to get input from the community. So with that, I'd like to introduce the Urban Field Studio team, Frank Fuller, Heidi Sokolowski, Jane Lim, and Marco Esposito of SWA, who will be making a presentation.
All right, do we have them with us?
And if we could unmute, he's under you, Urban Field Studio. Yep, there we go.
There we go. So I'm Frank Fuller, a partner with Urban Field Studio, and Heidi Sokolovsky is also partner. Together, we will present with Marco Esposito of SWA Landscape Architecture to go over the first presentation of different approaches and strategies, because as Director Gardner said, this is early days. And I'll just ask the next slide, please. So what we've been doing since we're just beginning is to look at the site, analyze the site. We've also had a chance to follow some of the presentations and to meet virtually with the Saris Regis DoStar team, which has been very helpful. And we've been working with Director Gardner and his staff. And also we've had a meeting with the downtown committee of the council just to get the lay of the land and to begin. But I'd just like to say that this is really the beginning of an engagement process. So this is the first time that all of us will have a chance, the public, planning commission, city council, and Saris Regis and their team to all work together towards having a signature town square. So you've seen some diagrams now with the Saris Regis presentation, but you can see in yellow the existing post office, and you can see in purple that line going through the site is the culvert, and you can see the sizes of the plazas. It's basically almost, when you take all of Lot E together, about 3/4 of an acre, with split about half and half on the Park Road side and the Lorton Avenue side. Next slide, please. So one thing to keep in mind as we look at the site is how many of the stores along Burlingame Avenue on the left are, even in these hard COVID times, are right there. And then other stores along both sides, Lorton at the top, Park at the bottom. And then colored in brown is something we need to keep in mind all the time, which is that there actually is a slope across the site, even though it appears flat. It's from the post office entrance on Park to the Burlingame Hotel side. There's a 3-foot difference. Next slide, please. It's also very important since what we're doing as a Saris Regis proposal, and David pointed out right from the beginning, Burlingame Avenue and the nice way that it's been re-landscaped and repaved is the core, and it is the main street. And any relationship that we can have with that, here we're looking at the Park Road intersection, is important. Next. And it's important to know that Park, and this is a photo taken even during the COVID crisis we're in, but you know, with social distancing and everything, there will be activity and continued activity. So one of the things we need to keep in mind is how does the farmers market and other events relate to the plaza, which here would be just to our right on this picture. Next. And so when we're on Park looking at Lot E on the site, one thing that was mentioned in the comments is all the shops that have their backs turned toward the plaza. We will look at plazas as we proceed on and compare with other places, is to look at how over time, since there's a lot of phasing that probably will occur, stores change and open in different directions. It's happened in Pasadena, it's happened in other places around the country. Another thing that's important here is the Yves Delorme building, the one closest to it, has a big blank wall that's not particularly active right now. So what might occur with that? Farther down to the right, sort of seen under the tree, is the Burlingame Hotel, which just barely turns the corner right now with activity. Next, please. We've been talking about the post office. One thing to know, which is important, is that the floor of the post office is 3 feet above where the plaza is. So as we look at those 7 wonderful windows, which will be fronting onto the plaza for Lot E. And the middle 3 historically could be opened up into nice double doors. There's 3 feet of difference there, and then there's the 3 feet across the site. So we're actually dealing with 6 feet of difference in terms of elevation from the post office floor to where the Burlingame Hotel is. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we're sort of in the analysis, what is happening here stage to help us understand as we begin all the different factors. So here, the Burlingame Hotel building is we're on Lorton looking across Burlingame Avenue, and the site is just beyond. Next, please. And so here at the Burlingame Hotel entrance to Lot E, we can see in the distance on the left, the back side of the Yves Delorme building. And also there's a small parking lot, which they use and is used with the alley. And then there's an alley that goes along this Burlingame Hotel building. So how all that can be woven in, which is not exactly part of the city ownership of Lot E, but maybe it happens over time. So we want to make sure that we don't preclude what could happen. At the same time, we're making the plaza work with all the land that is possible. Next slide, please. So Heidi Sokolowski is going to take us through some early diagrams of how we could perceive this site. Heidi?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. We want to present a few first considerations about the plaza context itself. And you could see here that we put in the office building as proposed. And you can also see all the retail lining the big block there, Burlingame Avenue on the left, Lorton on the north or up, and then Park Road at the bottom of the diagram. And since the plaza is a relatively long, stretched out space, there are different ways how to organize the plaza. One consideration would be to have the main plaza facing on Park Avenue and interact with that frontage and have a more secondary place or plaza area facing to Lorton Avenue. And that's more thinking about it programmatically. It will always be connected. Next, please. The other way that could get organized is that the main plaza would actually face on Lorton and have a more, I would say, intimate or with different activities plaza organized in front of the post office. Next, please. The other option is to really see it as one big plaza and make that a very generous feature that would still have some specific areas programmed, but it would be perceived as one big space. And then next, please. And then we also looked at what could happen if there was a building on Lot E facing the alley, and what kind of footprint that could look like. That would mean that there would be a paseo created and then a very clearly defined main plaza on the park side. We did a very quick test if a city hall would even fit on there. So it could be either an office building or some retail building, or it could even potentially be a city hall. These are really some very first conceptual. And next, please. And when you look at the scale of the plaza, it's really good to know what the scale really is in comparison to other places. So at the bottom, you see that big square there, that's Sonoma Plaza, for example. It's way bigger than Lot E. And just to the right of it is Healdsburg Plaza. If you have been there, you know what the scale feels like. Even that is quite much bigger than what we have here on Lot E. Next, please. And we would like to... So Frank, go ahead, yeah. Just saying that, we want to show you some plazas that have that same kind of scale. Frank?
Yes, thank you, Heidi. And so what we're trying to do is then show, well, let's look at some plazas that are of a similar scale. This plaza here, which is in Santana Row, is about the size of the Park Road side of Lot E. It's a little less than a half acre. And also, one other thing to note about it is how different parts of it are divided into different kinds of activities, including those pavilions right on the street. Next. Or if you look at the Santana Row itself, the street, what's important to know is that different kinds of activity pavilions, like the one beyond the large tree, or even the large tree, which was in this case brought to the site and planted, can be major features that are added to any kind of plaza. Next. A predominantly paved type approach was taken by Redwood City for Courthouse Square, where the building is prominent and the Fox Theater is behind where this picture is taken. And you can see flexible seating and pavilions on either side. This takes a point of view of it's a large room predominantly paved. Next. Or in Broadway Plaza, which is actually a shopping center, this is a small plaza that was redone within the Walnut Creek development. But what was important about it is that it has activity all around it in the shops. Plus it has different ways for people to sit and informally gather. And actually this gives you enough space for there to be social distancing as well. It also is about the size of the Park Road side, which is slightly bigger than the Lorton Avenue side of Lot E. Next. So just so you know, one thing we'll be doing is bringing lots of examples, because I think examples and comparisons for scale and activity and all kinds of things are very important as we begin, and particularly as we're in this situation of doing everything virtually. So everyone has comparisons to draw upon, and we'll probably be eliciting all kinds of ideas from everyone, the council, the planning commission, as well as the public, to look at together to see what's most appropriate and what's desired. Here, this particular plaza is interesting because what it does, it connects through the different streets and captures the flows, as we've heard here, between Lorton and Park, and maybe even an intermediate passage or passage from Burlingame Avenue into the plaza. Next. And here's one, Beverly Cannon Gardens, which actually Councilmember Colson brought to our attention. One thing that's important about this is that it really does connect two streets, and it has a series of rooms along that connection. Next, please. Now, Rancho Cucamonga in Southern California didn't have a downtown, and they wanted to have a downtown with a town square. So this is what it looks like, surrounded by shops, and on the north or the upper right part of this picture actually is their library and a child's theater. Next, please. And it provides active water fountain for play, and you can see there's some retail, predominantly restaurants along that side behind. Next, please. And then a big green, which is used for concerts, and then that they put a stage across that fountain when it's not used as a fountain, and that becomes a stage for concerts and other events. Next, please. Or maybe it's something that's more passive, movable chairs under a bosque of trees, so you get different kinds of shading, a fountain in the back. You can see there's a market going on the back left. This is in New York City. Next, please. Or another version of that same thing. And you can see that there are seat walls around so people can sit that way, or tables. There's also some art in the background, and a lot of paved space, but also some space with grass. Next, please. Marco is going to take us through a couple first diagrams. SWA Landscape Architecture.
Marco, you probably need
Have you unmuted, Marco?
Unmute yourself, yeah.
It looks like he doesn't have audio capability on SWA.
I see. Well, I'll take us through these. So what we did is we took from what Heidi's diagrams had been, and we went to the next step. Just first diagrams. These are not meant to be designs yet. These are meant to be explorations. So a couple things about this diagram is it says, yes, we're using the whole part of Lot E. It's also saying there's some other features we can use. For instance, there might be a nice terracing from the post office down into the plaza on the Park Road side. It also says if the Yves Delorme building and the parking in the alley behind the Yves Delorme building on that lower left on Park Road is needed to be kept as it is, then maybe there's a green wall or some other way of screening that or making an edge to the plaza. And the final thing on this slide, I think, shows is that if we could expand the sidewalks to how they're really arranged from the Burlingame Avenue streetscape design that was completed fairly recently, we could actually have a nice wider sidewalk, both for the post office development and for the Park Road side, which could then be coordinated perhaps with the farmers market and other events. Next, please. This just shows from the Museum of Art in San Francisco, sort of the ultimate green wall, in our opinion. It's just a wonderful wall, which referring to that green wall idea. Next. So this idea just says, well, what happens if we were to have some kind of pavilion building on the Lorton side? Could be a food hall, could be shops, it could be whatever might want to be in a food hall. And combine that with the green wall idea and with the terracing from the post office and those widened sidewalks. One of the things that this does is it allows for the alley that is behind the Burlingame Hotel and the shops next to it to exist as it is today, but give an edge to it. It also says, well, what happens if the food hall maybe is set back some from the Lorton Avenue side, which would allow you to see the retail that's been prominently talked about by the Saris Regis proposal, as well as giving you a minor space leading to a paseo that leads to the larger space, which would be on Park Road side. Next, please. Now, having a little pavilion or a food hall or something like that has been done in other places. Here, there's a by right pavilion that's built right in the Civic Center in San Francisco, which has been fairly well populated. Of course, a little limited right now with COVID-19, but still being used. Next. Or maybe it's slightly bigger. This is the Oxbow Public Market in Napa. Now, this is a bigger building. It's set above the level of the street. Maybe it wouldn't be this big, maybe something in between those two, but there are several examples of public markets we could certainly look at together if that's an idea that the community wants. Next. So then if you take that idea and expand upon it, you remember when we were looking at the Yves Delorme building, if we keep it and if it has that fairly blank wall that is below the windows at the upper floor, maybe it's possible for their parking lot behind the Yves Delorme building as well as the wall of their building, all or some, to have maybe a series of shops or stalls or some sort of activity that gives an activity edge on the opposite side from where we might be terracing or working with the post office windows and doors and terracing. So that sort of expands on that idea slightly. This also just has one more thing, which is that the City Hall could be reintroduced or another kind of building on the south side or the bottom of this slide of the Park Road side. So to complete sort of filling in the retail frontage on Park as well as what we're trying to do with the Pavilion building on the Lorton in this idea. Next, please. And so just give you a few examples of different kinds of little pavilions, little shops. Here's one. Next, please. I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly. Or more of an open air pavilion. So it's not a building like we showed for the Oxbow Market here for plants and other kinds of just open air, which can be closed or not closed, perhaps. Next. Or maybe it's just a big roof structure which covers for part of the time what could happen in an open space, in this case, mostly paved. Next, please. Or maybe it's like this one in Dallas, actually has some lawn area as well as some fountain area, and again, some covered, some not. You get different kinds of sun. Next, please. And Heidi's going to take us through a bit of idea about what we think about community engagement. Heidi?
So yeah, I just want to remind everyone that this is the start of the community engagement. We haven't really done any community engagement yet, and we are just about to embark on that. And of course, we want to get input from the community about what should happen on the plaza. This is an example that we did in Santa Clara. This was a very hands-on exercise. Of course, now we have to rethink how we're going to engage the community. Now moving to online, there's a whole set of tools that we can use. But we want to get started on this fairly soon. If you go to the next slide. What we just presented are very first just conceptual ideas, but again, we want to get the input from the community and see, how should a space like this actually get programmed? And this could be a discussion about different activities. Should it be flexible? Should there be fixed activities, seating areas, kids areas, things like that? Next, please. And then what kind of plaza, in terms of materials, do we want? Should it be soft-scaped, a lot of landscaping, hardscaped, little, smaller rooms that we have seen in one of the examples, or both? So we would like to find out from the community what their ideas are on that kind of thing as well. And next, please. Water feature, we just heard that we cannot really open up the culvert, but maybe there could be a reference to water, and that can be done in various ways, as you see here. Next. And then, of course, the question of public art. What kind of public art should there be? Something that's permanent, day and night effects, something that could be temporary and could change over time. That could be part of the building, but it could also be something directly on the plaza. And we would like to hear from the community about that as well. And next, please. And some of the public art could be really, really effective, especially at night, like in this example. Again, it's Beverly Canyon. It's, I think, very inspiring, and make that a place to use at night as well. Next, please.
So that is our presentation. Thank you very much for listening. And it's been a pleasure to work with the city and with the Saras Regis team as we've gotten started. And we look forward to this being the beginning of community engagement of all kinds. So thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you to the City Council Planning Commission and the public. We're open for questions and any comments.
All right, well, we certainly appreciate the exciting presentation. And as we're reminding the public, this is the very beginning of the conversation. And we look forward to figuring out whether it's virtually or when COVID-19 loosens, hopefully in-person opportunities for the public really to engage and have their views heard on this as well. Now, I do see we have a hand up. If it's a member of the public who's calling in, I don't have an identity, then we're going to wait for public comment for a little bit later, but I'm not sure if it's one of your members of the team or Madam City Clerk or Mr. Gardner. It's the last 3 digits of the phone number are 100. Is that a member of the design team that would like to speak? Because if not, if it's a member of public, they'll wait a little bit longer.
I believe it is Marco from SWA.
Yes, it is.
Should we go ahead and give Marco an opportunity to say a few words then?
Certainly, if you may.
Yeah, just before we open.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry for the glitch. I was using the phone because it has better sound quality to dial in and wasn't able to alert everyone about that. But no, I don't have anything to add at this moment, but I'm glad to join the meeting. And as Frank mentioned, we used the process that Frank outlined on all of our projects, kind of looking at the overall container and maximizing that indoor-outdoor interaction and drawing from the beauty of the surrounding projects and the activation of the ground floors. Frank is very modest. We worked together on several of those projects that he showed and many more individually. So we are very much enjoying this opportunity to work with you on this one, and we see that there's a lot of potential.
Thank you, Marco. And now that I'm aware of your number, if I see your hand pop up, I'll certainly take that into consideration during air traffic control here. And finally, Mr. Gardner, it's 11:03. I'm thinking we should probably try to wrap this conversation by about 11:30. Is that right? Or do we need more time for the next item?
I suggest that, yeah, I think the next item we had timed for half an hour, and, you know, all of these items could go longer than we have. So, but I would say 11:30 for this one, and then that still gives us a half an hour for the last item.
Okay, so that's the game plan. And if everybody can be mindful of that as we offer comments and questions, let's open it up, and we'll start with our planning commissioner who had his hand up. Commissioner Taronis, kick us off.
Thank you. Very good presentation. It's very exciting. The only thing that I would like to say is I think the direction that I was excited about was the idea of focusing the plaza on Park Road, the larger area. But I also like the idea of, because it's a long sort of skinny area, I like the idea of sort of filling in the gap tooth, perhaps on the Lorton area side with something like the food pavilion. Because what I was going to suggest, and I think a food pavilion is a better direction, but I was going to suggest some sorts of business incubators that could help with the energy of the plaza. In other words, you know, those would be sort of those small pavilion type things that we were looking at, but they're a step up from the food truck, but perhaps a food court or a public market element might be a better solution. So I think that has, personally, I think that has some promise. I think that overall it would need to fit into the context of the overall park. If that continued along and had an extension of that on the backside of the Yves Delorme building, that may be a good idea as well. But I think that it would have to make sure that it's not competing with whatever that pavilion element is and is more of an extension of it. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you, Commissioner Taronis. I do see Councilmember Ortiz had his hand up next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I agree with Commissioner Taronis with regards to the orientation. I think the Park Road is the natural side, just because it's wider and because of the setback of the post office on that end. And then the other thing, I'm very intrigued with the concept of a large tree. I thought that would make sense for Burlingame. I think we're the city of trees. I think that would be great.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. I see Chair Say has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. It's very exciting to see so many ideas. And I would say as something that we should just be aware of is maybe the size of our plots, our town square, and to be careful not to be a little of everything. I would say, like, I want to say, oh, that's a good one. That's a good idea. We should do this. We should do that. And so I'm sure we'll be putting a lot of careful thought into how we utilize this space collectively, and not to be, you know, something for everybody, but be flexible. I also agree and like the idea of a pavilion of sorts over in that kind of, is it northeast corner of the area closer to Lorton. I almost could imagine like a mini Quincy market there, or even another idea is maybe a art gallery of some sort. That could be a changing gallery that would bring people in to experience the space. and it could be some type of a, common civic space. Another thing I thought about was it would be great if we could plan to have our farmers market on the common square, much like City of San Francisco does over in the Civic Center area, and bring it off the street, but onto the grounds of the central square. So just so many thoughts and ideas. I think it's very exciting, and look forward to continuing to develop the ideas for this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Say. Vice Mayor O'Brien.
Yes, I actually, when looking at all the examples, really liked the Beverly Cannon. I think it's a nice balance of landscape and or softscape and hardscape. I don't like the idea of actually food vendors or pavilion. We have plenty of that on Burlingame Avenue. I look at this more of a gathering space for farmers market, entertainment. I would like more of a softened look and not something that's just too busy and too overwhelming. So I really do like those. I think you had two examples of the Beverly Cannon. It's just kind of a nice balance of little, granted it's a big courtyard, but it's broken up through landscaping. So those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Appreciate that. Councilmember Coulson.
Thank you. So normally Richard and I agree on everything, but I'm a little worried about the food, like a food pavilion per se, for a couple of reasons. One is the cost to build it. We're going to be trying to build something out here in the next few years, and I think we need to be thoughtful about that. And then also just the fact that we're going to probably have a restaurant or some type of foods and coffee shops in the building. Plus on Lorton, we have a lot of already small food providers along there. It's kind of a food type alley. So I don't really want to compete, and I'd be terrified that we'd put this food pavilion in and then possibly not be able to lease it, because there's so many other opportunities for people on the avenue. So I would be a little more open to kind of a market type artisanal market, or even temporary artisanal stalls where we had kind of a shade pavilion and then people sort of set up temporarily. I agree also with Commissioner Say that kind of trying to cram too many ideas into the one space could just get confusing to the users. And one of the things that I've really heard from people is this notion and need for sort of entertainment space, gathering space, a place to listen to music. So I'd rather keep it open and available to that kind of gathering as opposed to a permanent built fixed structure. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. I see we have a number of our commissioners and another council member raising their hand. Let's let the commissioners go ahead first. Commissioner Schmidt.
Yes, thank you. I actually want to reiterate Councilmember Coulson's comment there about open, flexible space. I actually have had the opportunity to go down to the Redwood City Town Square a number of times, Friday evenings, and they do have good entertainment there. It's a great open, flexible square and has a good open space. I think the key there is having good programming and using the space, not just saying we're going to build it and then ignore it. We have to really actively engage in programming it so that it gets used well. One of my main concerns as I look at Google Earth and in the pictures of that area is the rear of the buildings that are on Burlingame Avenue and face us. A lot of these other squares have streets on 3 or 4 sides. We're stuffing this into a space between a bunch of buildings and don't have the relief of the streets as a buffer too, to make it feel bigger. We're going to be multi-story buildings right on our perimeter of this. And so I think we need to really look at the backs of those buildings, how we might be able to engage. I think the Yves Delorme building is really in the wrong spot for us to do that. And I don't know what it would take to consider swapping them to the other side, maybe doing a land trade or a way to kind of refocus that so that then we could get two-sided spaces off of Burlingame Avenue and engage, all sides of this square, not just a big blank wall. So that it's one of my concerns looking at the backs of those buildings, and they're pretty ugly right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schmidt. Let's go to Commissioner Loftus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Very quickly, I think any number of things could be very successful there. It will get used. I'm particularly drawn to the notion of the heritage trees. Those kinds of trees, that space down at Santana Row is one of the nicest contemporary urban spaces I've seen in many years. And a part of it has to do with the gravity that that kind of object has in a space. So I think that we shouldn't get fussy with this space. I'd love to see, a heritage tree or more than one heritage tree with kind of natural gravity happen and the space be very flexible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Loftus. Commissioner Gall.
Thank you. So this is sort of circling back to my original comments, but I'm seeing that alley as something that's not going away. I know there was a comment made that maybe those retailers on Burlingame Avenue might open up the backs of their stores, but that's being a little bit too passive, I think, with a project this big. So, and I wasn't speaking specifically about a food court or some spaces that are only used at certain times. I'm thinking more of smaller retail spaces, potentially even at the height of the buildings on Burlingame Avenue, and they'd be brick and mortar and permanent spaces, not necessarily for food, but for any retail and possibly with office space above it. Again, it might mean cutting back a little bit of the other building, and that's why I didn't know if these are being done in conjunction or if we're drawing a line and saying, okay, here's the plaza and here's the office space. But I think that there's a possibility of taking and putting some permanent structures there. The alley is not going to go away because it's just the access for all of those businesses on Burlingame Avenue, and it's a perfect access for anything else that could be built along the way. It would probably mean, I think, that you would need to cut the office building down because the plaza would need to be bigger. There was a comment made about activity on each side of the plaza, and in some of those photographic examples, you can see how lively that makes the whole thing. So that's my only comment, as well as that big wall on the building next to the Park Avenue Plaza area. That could be a potential spot. I like the idea of Greenwall, but it's a potential spot for a mural as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Gall. I don't see any other commissioners raising their hands. Let's go to Councilmember Brownrigg.
Thank you. So just a couple of quick comments. One, this is a really exciting opportunity for our whole community. So, I mean, just quickly on Commissioner Gall's point, originally the owners of the post office and we did look at a joint project. It was a very different look and feel. I'm sure you remember it. And the benefit of this revised approach is the landowners on post office keep that land to themselves. We keep our land, and there's not a need to swap ownership. There is a kind of 10-foot deeding of public space to our side of it, if you will, because the culvert is impossible to build on. So in some ways, the Saris project is giving us 10 feet, not because they want to, but because of the culvert. Briefly so here's the challenge, I think, for all of us, which is this is a chance to really engage the public, to really do a charrette where a lot of input comes in about different ways to activate the space. And the challenge for you all will be, and for us too, and for Urban Fields, is to manage this process quickly enough that we can keep up with Saris, because Saris will be in a hurry. I mean, they have to do the environmental review and all the rest of it. They have to get through you guys, but they're going to be in a hurry, and we need to make sure we keep up and yet also pay respect and give the public a chance to comment. And so that's just a process observation. And then finally, I would say, I love the idea of a fountain that can convert to a stage. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but in one of the designs, that I think both Saris and Urban Fields imagine is the post office doors open up onto a terrace and then steps down to the plaza. So that's a beautiful way to engage both the building and the plaza and create places to sit. I strongly commend you all to read like how to build beautiful public squares. There's like, this is an art. And there's some, one of which is seating and movable seating so that people can be flexible. So then finally, I'll just finish with the thought that if one were to put that fountain in the middle between the two rectangles and maybe up a little bit to account for the elevation drop, you could have a stage that would face in both directions and a fountain that would be in the middle and yet still have the formal hardscape, more classic town square on the park side and a more, rural / park setting on Lorton side. But anyway, I'm super excited about this. And like I say, this was a vision that our whole community set back in the mid 2000s, and now we're finally getting a chance to make it happen.
Thank you for that comment. I don't see any other planning commissioners or council members with their hands up, so maybe I'll take this opportunity to weigh in a little bit before we open up to public comment. Actually, let me offer a question, and then after public comment, I'll weigh in with some thoughts, food for thought. So shifting gears from the programming, the aesthetics, which is an important part of this conversation, there's an element of how particularly, and we're particularly mindful of this when we've got COVID-19 upon us and budget impacts, that how we actually get this done, how we pay for it. And it's been extremely generous that Saris Regis has offered to help us with that as this development progresses. So maybe this is a question for Mr. Hopkins, but when we look at this project and how we figure out when we're dreaming about all of our wish list, how we bring this to reality and pay for this, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of how Saris Regis projects can contribute to the funding of this town square to sort of maximize that? Are there certain things that as we plan the development building that we should be thinking about? Maybe this is a question I should have asked earlier, but it sort of is in the context of bringing this project to reality in the town square. Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer that question. And also, I'll tag on to it one comment. I agreed with everything I heard on the comments, but particularly the food comment. I think one aspect to our success is going to be that the retail is successful, because it's going to be costly to put there in the first place. So I strongly agree with not over retailing, particularly as it relates to food uses. On your question, so the real driver of cost for us that provides some sort of a lever for contributions to the town square is parking. And parking's, it's a question of what does the market demand and what do planning codes require. And we obviously must provide what the market demands. And we're providing not only for our office tenant, but also for the public ultimately, as we previously mentioned. And so the question is, can we not overpark this thing? If we need to overpark it, we're going to spend, in the conditions that we're looking at, $75,000, $80,000 a stall to build a parking stall. So we need to find a way not to do that. We need to build enough parking, and we need to not create problems. And we're confident our plan does that. So working with staff to make sure the parking's right-sized is the real opportunity for us to provide some real meaningful contributions that will create what was just described.
No, well, I appreciate that insight, and I know those conversations have to happen with staff offline, but I just had to ask that question in terms of because we do want to dream big. This is a legacy project, but we appreciate your partnership in that. Just a couple of thoughts I'll add to it. Really great comments by everybody here. I think when I think of a future town square, I dream about what are the most beautiful town squares in all the world. And you can't help but think of Europe. So what are those elements? I can't help but think of outdoor dining, right? Informal sort of space, some form of, usually a water feature is something that adds beauty. Outdoor, some sort of performance place where there can be community gathering spaces, where there can be some kind of presentation or concert or stage. Art is involved, and flexible space. I'm eager to hear what the community wants, but I do see a lot of value in having sort of flexible space as opposed to fixed features. And there's something intriguing when you look at Redwood City's downtown square, which has a lot of hardscape. When we think about Burlingame, which so much of our civic identity is green, I think there's an intriguing opportunity to add some, I concur with some of the other comments about adding softness and green where we can, where it makes sense, could be really, really beautiful. I think before we open it up to, I think let's go ahead and open it up to public comment, because we're at a pretty good time, and then we can have final closing comments from the Planning Commission and City Council as well. But this has been a great presentation and a dialogue. And again, this is just phase one of a lot of community outreach, because this space has to respond to what the public wants too, along with a lot of professional expertise and guidance. So Madam City Clerk or Mr. Gardner, do we have any public comments on email?
Mayor Beach, yes, we do have one comment on the public comment at burlingame.org email address.
Okay.
It is signed by Jennifer Pfaff, and it reads, please do not fill up what little open space we have remaining in our downtown. Future generations will be grateful that we didn't build over Lot E on Lorton. Personally, I prefer both sides mostly open, using the greening of exposed walls on the back of Burlingame Avenue if possible. At most, very low scale, perhaps movable smaller food pavilion stands with hookups to offer some flexibility for various larger events. Finally, please, let's leave the generous setback on the Park Road face of the post office alone. The real swath of green is character defining and helps blend built space with air and open space, and preserves the original intent of the site plan of the post office. A large tree transplant over real ground, very cool, love that. Signed, Jennifer Pfaff.
Thank you, Ms. Pfaff, President of our Historical Society and caretakers of all things green and tree related in our community. Important voice for sure. Other public comments via email, and members of the public who may be watching, you can email us right now at publiccomment@burlingame.org, or you can call in via Zoom. And if I see your hand raised, you can do that by dialing *9 on your telephone.
We are seeing on chat, there is no request for public comment via chat.
Okay, thank you for confirming that. We'll give one more moment here. Seeing no other public comments, we'll go ahead and close public comments at this time and provide members of our Planning Commission or City Council to say any closing thoughts on this. And then we'll also give the leaders of the the design team on the public square a moment before we close. Okay, I see Council Member Ortiz has raised his hand.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One of the things I'm listening to everybody talk and putting all these ideas together, and the one thing I can think of is it's going to be really good to use other cities as an example, but this plaza has to be a Burlingame plaza. And we're going to make it things that make it unique to us. And so I go back to the tree. We are the city of trees. I think that could help us make it unique. But and then the walls, the green walls, I agree with that too. Just make it a very unique spot, but it has to say Burlingame on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. Closing comments from Planning Commission or members of the council before I give, actually, let me give the opportunity to the designers, the leaders of this this beautiful town square design to say any final thoughts, things you're hearing, and validate that.
Thank you very much. This is Frank Fuller. So we're definitely very excited about this. And it's taken a while to start, and now we're started. So it's really terrific. And I just want to thank everyone for all the good comments, because this is the beginning, and we're going to hear many more comments as we start during the COVID crisis to have community engagement of all kinds. And just so you know, some of the ways we've been doing this in other places, And some of the parts we put in our proposal, but that was quite a while ago before the crisis, was to have websites, to have all kinds of ways to be able to contribute, even ways of mapping or sharing images, different ways to do this while we're in this situation. And hopefully soon, we're going to be able to actually have meetings together of different kinds where we can dive into more about design and idea sharing. But thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Also want to give an opportunity to our city manager or our city attorney to have any final sort of closing thoughts or big picture before we turn it over to council.
I don't have anything to add. I think this was a great discussion. Thank you.
All right, excellent. And Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just want to thank the design teams, both Urban Fields, but especially Saris. You know, I take great comfort in the fact that Mr. Hopkins is a resident, that Mr. Dostart knows our area so well. You know, and I think Dave said it exactly right. This is an incredibly important, I mean, it's sort of when you do the Google thing and you look at a bullseye, this is the middle of downtown Burlingame. And it is a magical and important place. And I am really glad that people who are going to be helping us think about this legacy that we're creating for our residents are people who live and work around here and really, really kind of get it. So it's a burden on all of us because the 7 commissioners and the 5 council members will be making a decision that lasts for 100 years. But I think it's a huge opportunity. I'm super excited. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further comments? That was a great closing summary, and you read my mind with a number of things I was going to mention, so I won't repeat them, but this is a huge opportunity. Burlingame has a tradition of lots of civic engagement and being very thoughtful and deliberate in how we just make this an amazing community. And this project is going to really provide such important community gathering space. It's maybe the one thing our downtown is missing right now. And it's just a really exciting opportunity to build something for many future generations to come. So with that, Mr. Gardner, did you get sort of the guidance you need? And of course, really, this is the kickoff for the public engagement. And so it at least, I think, provides the design team some initial thoughts to go out to the public with, and then we can further refine them. But do you have any other further closing comments?
No, just again, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity. We've wanted to kick off this initiative, and it's not what we thought we would be doing in terms of kicking it off, but I appreciate that the Urban Field Studio also has some ideas on how to virtually engage the community, at least in the next couple months, and move forward. And this feedback from both the council and the commissioners and members of the community has been very helpful. So appreciate it all.
Thank you. I think this meeting recording will serve as an important segue for folks who aren't joining us today but want to learn more about the project. And then, of course, I do encourage members of the public to read the meeting minutes from the council study sessions. Were they in January, and was it March, or was it, I think it was February. We had another one in February. Has some important backstory of some of the, how we even got to this place with the project. So we thank everybody for their participation and the value add. And I think at this point we should move on to the final item on our agenda, which is item 5D. Planning Commission recommendations. So Mr. Gardner, this is your show today, so take it away. Thank you. And look, hey, 11:31, we're on time.
Yeah, there we go. So moving on to the last item, the city of Burlingame is unusual in that the Planning Commission does not receive recommendations from staff on applications that come before it. The intent of this practice is to really vest the design authority with the commissioners, recognizing that the design function of the Planning Commission is important in guiding the character of the development in Burlingame. But from time to time, there have been interest in reconsidering or making adjustments to this practice. And sometimes applicants will ask why things are set up this way in the first place. It's been 5 years since we last had this discussion, so this seemed like a timely moment to re-engage. In the 5 years since the matter of the Planning Commission recommendations was last discussed, there have been some changes to state law, particularly regarding multifamily residential projects. These changes significantly limit the ability of the Planning Commission or the City Council to deny or modify a multifamily residential project that it would otherwise comply with the respective zoning and development standards. So there's less discretion than what we're used to. And in particular, the Housing Accountability Act limits the ability of municipalities to deny or downsize a multifamily residential project that otherwise complies with the measurable zoning standards. So that is one thing that's changed since we last had this discussion 5 years ago. I'll also add that the staff does not have a position one way or the other. We're really here to serve the Planning Commission and the City Council. So we'll take that direction whichever way it comes, and whether there's any changes that want to be made. So with that, I'll step aside and have the discussion. And Mayor Beach, I believe you're muted.
Thank you, appreciate that. So thank you for the setup, Mr. Gardner. And I wanted to also point out for members of the public, we do have a staff report and including additional agenda items, which includes a letter to the mayor and the city council and for discussion. And do we have any questions on this item from members of the council or the planning commission at this time? Maybe, Mr. Gardner, could you summarize for the sake of the public the additional letter to the mayor and the city council as part of the agenda packet?
So there is a letter from a applicant that had a project go before the planning commission and city council last year. And that has partly spurred this current discussion, is that the letter was received back in January, and we're wanting to have a public forum. The letter has made some suggestions to changes in processes in terms of staff having recommendations or approval authority in conjunction with the planning commission. Again, I'll say staff is not, we're neutral in terms of what's put forth in that letter, but that is attached to the staff report and relates to the relationship of whether staff would be making recommendations as part of a design review process, and then who ultimately has the final authority over actions on a project.
So thank you for that. And sort of the setup to this is, again, what Kevin mentioned is that the landscape has changed, particularly in terms of all the housing legislation that's coming down, particularly for multi-unit residential. We have heard, there's one letter that's attached to the staff report, but I think it's fair to say, at least my experience as an elected leader has been that I've heard comments from the community along the way that get a little bit nervous during the planning commission process, that sometimes that process feels they expect one thing and then the project evolves to a different place, which is fine. That's part of our design review process that we've had in the past. But again, certain legislation is changing the landscape. But considering that other cities do often have recommendations, staff recommendations when they review an application, and they're working with applicants behind the scenes before it goes to planning commission. Some cities have opportunities where they can provide recommendations whether or not the project meets our policy criteria. Would that be helpful? Would that hinder? Would that provide value? I think this is just an opportunity for the city council and the planning commission to have an open dialogue about what that would mean, as we're rolling up our sleeves and actually doing this work for the community. So anybody have questions, clarifying questions or comments before we open it up to public comment? I see Commissioner Schmidt has his hand raised first.
Yeah, I was not on the commission when this particular, project went through in which that we have the letter. And it seems to be maybe an area that we are trying to focus this conversation on a little bit, because I do understand the state mandate on the multifamily, but I don't know that that is what's been generating this particular conversation. I guess my question, Kevin, would be, if we had the authority different for planning, what would you have done differently, let's say, in the situation that we have here with that particular applicant? Because I went back and I looked at both sets of videos, I read everything. And so I'm interested in how would you have done it differently if you were vested with different authority?
So yeah, so there's kind of two parallel discussions here. One is that particular project, which has been the subject of the letter and the current discussion, and then the broader discussion of Planning Commission recommendations. What's tricky with basing this discussion off of a particular project is, there's a sub discussion here, which I would expect maybe some of the planning commissioners will want to jump onto, in terms of sometimes projects change after they've been approved. And then what the planning commission ends up looking at is a assortment of either as-built changes or proposed changes that were not part of the original project approval. And that does put the commission in an awkward position where, changes are being made. The commission made an approval based on a certain set of assumptions, and then those assumptions change. Sometimes there's very good reasons for that, but it makes it a less cut and dry discussion than maybe how we kind of set this up. Part of this, we've tried to figure out how to approach this discussion, because in that case, it was an instance where the project had changed during construction, and the commission was asked to look at those changes. So that's kind of its own topic. And, in terms of how the staff would approach that, I think the staff respects the approval of projects. So it's staff would be in the same kind of awkward position that the commission would be when a project changes during construction, and what had been agreed upon in the original approval is changing. So I'm maybe not exactly saying what we would do in that particular instance. I don't want to necessarily litigate a prior approval, but that's kind of just an extra shade of complication, perhaps, in that, what do you do with the project as things do change during construction? And I don't know if the planning, staff would come to different conclusions in terms of how to, handle as-built variations or proposed variations on a project.
So let me, thank you, Mr. Gardner. I'm going to chime in a little bit too, just for a clarification. The issue that we're discussing today is not whether or not whether the staff has different authority per se to actually decide. The authority to approve or deny a project or change a project would rest and does rest with the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council for setting the policy or dealing with if there are, I'm losing the thought, if there are objections, what's the word I'm looking for, Kevin? I can't, if there are
appeals.
Thank you, appeals, could not think of the word. Okay, it's been a long morning already. The issue we're discussing today, and again, we don't want to litigate a previous issue. The issue we're discussing is whether or not it would be helpful and provide value in the current world order as it exists today for staff to look at a project and rather than just say, here are your findings, should you find them, but for staff to sort of preview, having worked with the applicant, to get it to a point to say, recommend approval or recommend X number of changes or make some staff vision recommendations for the Planning Commission to, whether or not they agree or disagree is entirely up to the Planning Commission, but at least have sort of a first pass of whether or not the project meets the policy that was set in the zoning code. I think that's how I think we should frame this conversation. And I see Commissioner Toronis has his hand up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, to cut to the chase a little bit, setting aside the particular application, as Mayor Beach has indicated, from a higher level, I for one don't have any particular issue with more detailed staff recommendations on findings, and especially when there are more recommendations related to statute, both from staff and from the city attorney, particularly on legal issues such as related to the HAA. However, I think we always and still have to maintain an air of neutrality prior to a decision being made and something being quasi adjudicated before the commission. You know, I see nothing but major logistics, legal, Brown Act issues, et cetera, if we were to transfer authority to staff. You know, and I know Mayor Beach, you've sort of cut that off in terms of where things might be headed. But my point being, again, in terms of that air of neutrality, I think applicants have to be assured of some certainty relative to our ordinances, relative to statute, perhaps even relative to precedents. But there's no way that we can maintain that air of public neutrality if there was instead we cross the line to a realm of assurance to an applicant in working with staff that some decision and recommendation is going to go before the commission that will give them the decision or the position that they're looking for. You know, I think that those decisions have to continually be made in a public forum. And I know no one's suggesting otherwise, other than the fact that the suggestion and the letter that we have before us suggests the potential for transferring that authority to staff. You know, because then the question becomes what happens during the application period and working with staff all through the way that isn't in a public forum. So, you know, but again, I go back to, yes, there is a need, and we've sort of talked about it with staff and with the city attorney. There is a need to know when we're in a realm of needing more detailed recommendation, input, and direction, particularly on legal issues, such as the Housing Accountability Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Toronis. And absolutely, I don't think anybody is suggesting that by a staff recommendation, it would be decision-making wouldn't be in the public realm and publicly transparent. But I understand your concern. I think our city attorney would like to chime in here. Thank you, Madam City Attorney Kathleen Kane.
Hi, yeah, and I want to echo what Director Gardner said. You know, staff, this is the system that we've had, and we operate within it, and it's fine. But this issue does arise periodically, so that's why it's being brought up here. But I just want to quickly say a couple of things. One, the maintenance of clear authority in the Planning Commission to exercise your discretion is incredibly important, and is what makes your decisions legally defensible. So we wouldn't want to do anything that undermines that. And you know, the letter from a member of the public may not have the same understanding of those structures as the commission and the council does. So that was a personal opinion that was expressed. But we do need to make sure that discretion is vested in you. Having said that, I've worked in a number of jurisdictions where, you know, this is standard practice, and it does not, from my perspective, create any problems vis-a-vis, you know, Brown Act or public meeting issues, provided that the actual decision-making is done by the decision makers in the public meeting, and that is very clear, and it's communicated by staff. What it does do, incidentally, operationally, is it makes it easier, for better or for worse, depending on your relationship with or trust in staff. It makes it easier for staff to influence the projects coming before the commission, because right now it's difficult to influence them towards a greater quality issue, because it's harder to establish that there's they would risk for example, a feedback that this doesn't meet the design criteria. So you end up with projects that have a little less pre-vetting in them, but that may or may not be something that you want, and that's within your discretion to determine. From a legal perspective, there is no issue with the commission overriding staff's recommendations. I think the way it operates in other cities, it has a salutary effect of making the commission think about why you're overriding them. And as long as you're articulating your reasons and those reasons relate to the standards, then it's not only defensible, but it's actually good because you're creating a record that is really useful at that point. So from my perspective, I'm pretty agnostic as to whether staff makes recommendations or not. I just really like the good records that are made when you make a decision and that relate to the standards, and then those are eminently defensible.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. Let's go to Chair Say.
Oh, sorry. I was thinking I was a little bit later because I raised my hand later, but
sorry, I'm trying to clear traffic control. Didn't see them all.
Yes, no, thank you. I wanted to speak more from being an applicant from, I've been an applicant to our city. I'm obviously serving on the Planning Commission, but I'm also an applicant in other cities around the Bay Area, and how my experience is throughout various different jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And I provided some thoughts and comments to Director Gardner about some of the things that maybe we can do to help manage expectations of our applicants. I think that I can totally understand how an applicant can come before the Planning Commission and have no idea what they're going to be facing. They believe and feel they have a beautifully designed home or project and expect an approval. And one of the things that I have liked seeing in other cities is some homework that's given to the applicant in advance of making a submission, whether it's a checklist of answering questions, how many detached garages are on your street, if you're applying for an attached garage, for example. If you're proposing a different roof line, how many different types of roof lines are there on your street? You literally count them and provide some data and documentation to as part of the submission that actually helps the Planning Commission to could help the Planning Commission to make a decision on accepting their proposal. It could be about materials and finishes, of course, too. We can talk about window types and everything. But I think that if we can find a way to better manage that expectations for applicants, that it would help all parties. It is not fun for us on the commission to listen to a lovely presentation and then tear apart a proposal because of drafting errors or inconsistencies with design guidelines. And so I think that there are things that we can do to make it better for the applicants, and it's something that we should entertain. I was going to say also, another element too is for those applicants who are applying for a second story structure in the hillside area, we have, of course, a hillside area construction permit process, but it doesn't necessarily mandate story poles for those applicants. And it would seem to help some of the projects move faster through the process and before the Planning Commission is to actually require the story poles so that neighbors can get a chance to see what the massing of a house, a proposed home would look like. It would give the opportunity for neighbors near or far to comment on possibly blockage of views and things like that. I think there's some efficiencies that we can find in helping applicants to get through our process quicker if we give them a little bit more homework and responsibilities beforehand.
Okay, thank you for the comments. Let's go to Commissioner Loftus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm not sure exactly where to start on this. So I'm going to start by saying I think I thank the staff because you guys do an exceptional job of providing guidance to us. It's incredibly valuable. And if we were to decide that you should make a recommendation, I can live with that. It does make me wonder, and the letter made me wonder, well, what's the point of a planning commission anyway? Why not just get rid of it and let the staff do everything? And I've been thinking about, I've been stewing on it for days now. And ultimately, our job is, I think the commission exists, planning commissions exist to represent the public. They are members of the public, representing the public in the tending of the public realm. And what I sense in the letter is that applicant, and maybe many applicants, want certainty. Well, there's no certainty in the interaction of human beings, and it gets sorted out in a public discourse, and that's what's happening in planning commission. Certainty is not possible. Objectivity is not possible. There seemed to be an implication in the letter that we need people who can be objective. Well, nobody can be objective. Unfortunately, I can't. I find it easy to be impartial, and it's caused me to end up on 2 juries. And maybe I wish I were less impartial and I didn't have to serve on these juries. One of them was 9 weeks long. But I am as impartial as I can possibly be. Many of the things that we approve, I don't particularly like. That's not my style. I'm a modernist at heart, but I'm impartial enough that I can look at metal roofs and say, I love metal. I love metal and glass, but those don't belong in these neighborhoods. And I still believe that. I already felt colleagues all the time. Ultimately, we're just representing the public. And I have to say that I just want to go on record. I have to say, I wish that I'd never seen this letter. I was not involved in that action. I wish I'd never seen the letter, because it made me wonder, well, what makes volunteers invaluable? Or what makes us not valuable? I felt devalued as a volunteer serving my community by that letter. And I wondered, should I just not do this? But I think that, I like giving back to the community and bringing, 35 years of architectural experience, giving back to the community in my expertise. And so I will live with wherever we end up, and I'll be happy to do it. But I better not go any farther, because this got me worked up. It really did.
All right. Well, thank you for your candid comments, Commissioner Loftus. We appreciate them. And please don't for a moment feel, any of you, a lack of value for what you do for the community. And the discussion that we're having is about whether or not a staff recommendation, not a staff decision, could help guide both multi-unit residential under the new legal landscape or potentially single family residential and commercial under the current existing conditions that we face today. And perhaps it personalized it too much to include the letter, but it began the conversation, and please don't feel a lack of value. It is 11:55. We have a number of more comments from commissioners. We have to open it up to public comment as well. So I just ask everybody who would like to speak to just be as succinct as possible, because we want to be respectful of everybody's time on a Saturday as well. But I am not cutting anybody short, and I'm not going to stop the meeting right at noon if we haven't completed this conversation. So Commissioner Sargent, thank you for contributing to this conversation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm a regular applicant in Burlingame myself, so I'm incredibly sympathetic to all applicants, because it's a pretty harrowing process, taking a project you've been working on for months in front of a body like the Planning Commission, where there's no certain outcome, as we've discussed. And I have no problem with staff recommendation. I think the city attorney made a good point about it. Gives kind of staff more weight behind what I think they're doing already in terms of guiding applicants. But if we were to do it, I'd want it to be for the right reasons. And I can't speak to this project that kind of started this discussion specifically, but you know, in the past, we've had projects that came before us that were clearly not to the design guidelines and weren't going to be approvable. And I'd go back to staff afterwards and I'm like, what happened to that? How did that come before us? And they're like, you know, we've been talking to this applicant and telling him it wasn't going to go towards approval, but we can only say so much. It's ultimately their decision whether they believe us or want to even you know, take our guidance. So, you know, maybe a staff recommendation would help. And you know, to use this particular project as an example, you know, I was on part of the body when it was originally approved, but I had to recuse when it was considered for the changes. But I went back and looked at the video, and nothing that happened in that meeting was a surprise to me. And it was all based on stuff we'd said before about all that specific stuff. So I'm sure staff was aware of what was had a pretty good idea of where it was going to go. And I would be surprised if they weren't giving the applicant direction. And, you know, I just want to speak, you know, just echo what Commissioner Loftus said about, you know, the staff and what a great group of people they are and what a great resource they are to us and to the community. And I think the staff and the Planning Commission works really well together because, you know, Commissioner Loftus is talking about his experience in design and architecture. And, you know, I was just looking at the 7 commissioners. You know, we probably have 150 years of industry specific experience that we're adding to both the community and to the staff that the staff doesn't have currently. That, you know, I know we're really not talking about taking that away, but I think that would be a real loss for the community. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sargent. So I want to make sure, council members, if we have questions at this point, to offer questions to staff, we can open it up to public comment and then come back for final comments. But I don't see any other commissioners raising their hands, so let's go to Vice Mayor O'Brien.
Actually, I don't have a question. I have comments, so I'll wait.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Councilmember Brownrigg, do you have your hand is down? Okay. Commissioner Toronis, I'll give you the floor if you have a question, but we really need to be mindful of time. So if you have a question or a very brief comment, since your colleagues also had comments as well. Commissioner Toronis, did you want to raise your hand? No?
That's okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. All right. Did you have a comment? Because other commissioners had opportunity to comment.
Okay.
So very briefly.
One last thing real quick. Again, I have no issue with staff making more hard recommendations one way or the other. I have no issue with them getting more detailed in directing us towards findings. I will just say, I am curious once we get to the point, as Commissioner Sargent was suggesting, when an applicant insists on moving forward with the project and staff comes forward with a recommendation for denial. That's it.
Thank you for the comment. Let's open up to public comment at this point. And because we are running short on time, we'll be consistent throughout the rest of the meeting. Members of the public will have 2 minutes maximum. And if you can get done faster, that's even better. Do we have any public comments via email, Mr. Gardner?
We do have one, and I believe it will take less than 2 minutes to read.
Okay.
It is signed by Jennifer Pfaff. 5 years ago, I commented on this issue that our city has an extraordinary process that results in better projects. Though clearly the state has removed the ability for the Planning Commission body to steer multi-unit residential, we, the public, and the commission can still make a difference in the end, making a better project. The option I think being discussed here of putting more decision-making abilities and recommendations over the counter with staff in the planning department's purview could result in undue pressure from developers on staff. For example, I can easily see cases where developers put pressure on staff, or worse, even picking and choosing staff members they may perceive as being more lenient, or conversely steering away from ones who may interpret issues more narrowly. I continue to think it is a mistake to go in this direction. There needs to be ongoing public input to get the best projects realized for our city. Signed, Jennifer Foff.
Thank you, Ms. Foff. With that, no other email public comments? Okay, I'm seeing from members of the public, I believe we have a hand raised for Mr. and Mrs. Chen. You can unmute yourself, or I don't know if we need the...
Terrific. Thank you for unmuting, and good morning, everyone. And Mayor Beach and the members of the Burlingame City Council, we really appreciate speaking with you today and just being a part of the conversation. We appreciate that you have taken the letter that we submitted and just being a part and being here today to discuss it with you. One thing that we want to start with is that we're not asking, because based on some of the conversation, we're not asking for certainty, and we definitely see the value in the volunteer time of the Planning Commission. We know that that is a very difficult and challenging job. I think one of the things that we're really just trying to bring forth is that we feel strongly that the planning staff are not utilized as fully as they could and should be in this process. And this is directly from the experience that we had. They play an incredibly integral role, and they do a tremendous amount of work in working with homeowners such as ourselves on all the parts of the process and trying to provide guidance and support. But what we found is that they're unable to help homeowners such as ourselves, as they don't have a voice as of a recommendation in the meetings other than just presenting facts. We think that one benefit of providing staff more latitude to make recommendations, not decisions, but recommendations to the commission, would allow them to also provide better guidance to community members that they're working with. If the staff potentially also had authority to make some of the smaller in the field changes that are less critical to the design or maybe controversial decisions related to a project, you know, maybe a material change or moving a window 6 inches one direction or another, it would better utilize the volunteer commissioner's time to spend on those more complicated and direct situations. We also wanted to take a moment. There were some things that were said today that we also agree with. Commissioner Say talked about adding some guidance for applicants or homework along the process. You know, thinking of that consideration, we think that that would have been incredibly valuable to us and would have, I think, also helped commissioners during in the one commission meeting that we had.
Excuse me, so, I'm going to have to ask you to finish up because it's been 2 minutes. I'll give you just about 10 or 15 more seconds, okay?
Sure. You know, there was a decision that was rendered based on one commissioner's inaccurate statement of no houses in our neighborhood had corner caps. If we had been provided guidance that we had to present that information as part of our process, then that information would have been out there.
Thank you very much for participating in the conversation. I'm sorry I have to cut everybody off and be fair as far as time goes. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Mr. Gardner, do you have logs of that? I don't see any members of the public via phone who'd like to hit *9. You can do so at this time.
Yeah, no further emails or chats.
Okay, all right. Well, with that, thank you for participating. I'm going to close public comment at this point and then really let colleagues have an opportunity to speak. And remember the issue here, I know that there's certainly, let's keep this to the issue we're discussing, is whether or not a planning recommendation from planning staff, not a decision, would be useful, helpful, valuable in this current moment in time for the commission to then decide whether or not they agree or disagree. The power would fully vest in the planning commission. And I'm curious to hear colleagues' comments on this. Councilmember Brownrigg has his hand up.
Thanks. So I'll be quick, or try to be, but I have 3 points to make. One, there are objective parts of a planning process and subjective parts. So objective parts are traffic studies. You know, experts do it. And there, I think we really can't second guess experts like that. That's not appropriate. So I stand in favor of being told by planning commission or by planning staff for multifamily buildings where discretion exists for the commission and where it does not. And I think that would be helpful. But I stand strongly in favor of the current system that we have. I think you can look at design review. You can look at the two-story homes built before design review and see a bunch of boxy buildings that probably adhere to the setbacks and the no variance is required, but don't look good. And then post-design review, post-planning commissions having authority and speaking for the style of a neighborhood, and the buildings got a lot better. And then finally, I point to a sister city where they don't have planning commissioners with an awful lot of authority, much more of a sort of rubber stamp process, and a huge project going through with staff, back and forth with staff, back and forth, staff recommends, and it got shot down. And that was a huge problem for everybody. So I like this system. I trust our commissioners. I think our commissioners have to be careful not to drill down on really tiny details. That's where discretion gets misused. But I stand in favor of the system as we have it.
Thank you for your comments. I see Vice Mayor O'Brien Keegren has her hand up.
Yeah, so this actually was brought up years ago, whether to incorporate staff recommendation. I think one of the things that came up at that time, and actually Commissioner Toronis touched upon this, is neutrality. And even though it's a recommendation, then there's the applicants that think that it is the decision. And when they come in front of the planning commission, if they were to overturn that, the applicants don't necessarily appreciate that. I think there might be a happy medium with this. I think our planning commission does a phenomenal job. They do their homework, they study it well. It's nice to have 7 different people looking at a project, because something that isn't caught by one person may be caught by another. I'm wondering if we went the route of, if a staff person, planning staff is concerned about this project, there's nothing wrong with talking with the applicant over the counter on what they should focus on, or if something is really out of whack. And if they come back and staff is kind of seeing that same thing and they have concerns, maybe they incorporate the concerns in the staff report without actually making a recommendation. Because planning commissioners will know when they read the staff report, then there might be some areas they should focus a little bit more on because there are concerns, rather than a straight recommendation. I think with the straight recommendation, you may get into the trouble of rubber stamping, and that there may be some planning commissioners that won't feel comfortable overturning staff. So I do think the process we have now has worked pretty well, but if staff want to give additional comments and guide to concerns, I think that would be actually very helpful for the planning commissioners.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Ortiz, you have your hand up next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I have to agree with my counterparts. I think the process works. I think it's never going to be completely objective, and I don't think any of us want it to be completely objective. So the question is where in that spectrum of objectivity we fall and how granular we get. So that's the only question I have, but I agree. I think you guys all add amazing value, and I think that the city's better for it. And I think the individual projects are better for it, for your review, that it's free architectural review. So it's great. And I appreciate everything you guys do. Having said that, the one issue that I've had in the past is that we have had commissioners that were not at the one meeting, and that they come up at the next meeting and have a completely new set of issues that were not raised in the beginning for the project. And this is where I think the staff could step in and said, you know what, those were discussed in the last meeting, those were already dealt with, and avoid a little trouble for constant revisiting of the issues based on who's at the planning commission or not. So, but otherwise, again, the only issue is where we move that needle in that spectrum. But other than that, I think you guys do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. I see Councilmember Colson is next. And I'd also like to ask colleagues if we think that there's a different sort of conversation to be had among multi-unit residential versus other projects, and I'm eager to hear what Councilmember Coulson thinks in general.
So I don't really have an opinion on that question, but I do, I really do sort of rely heavily on Councilman Brownrigg and Vice Mayor O'Brien's expertise, having served on the Planning Commission before. But I have personally taken 4 projects through our Planning Commission over the last 20 years, and I will tell you that every single one of them had very significant and important changes that the Planning Commission suggested to me that made those projects better, every single one of them better. So I think there's, there is the occasional time when there can create confusion with an applicant, and even on occasion, the recommendation might be taken a little bit literally at first, but the process seems to work for me. I'm very sorry that the particular applicant, the Chens, had this situation happen, and I think we did get it remedied in their favor at the council level. But considering the vast number of projects that come through and then the ones that get appealed to council, it seems to me like it's working pretty well as it is. And then the final thing I would say is, I agree, our staff is amazing and they do a really good job. But we may not always have the same staff here. The staff could easily change over time and not have the same level of experience or confidence in making those kinds of decisions that our current one does. And therefore, I would not want to create a policy that is predicated upon the current staff's capabilities without understanding that that could potentially change in the future. So my inclination is to side with Councilman Brownrigg and Vice Mayor O'Brien's recommendations, and also Councilman Ortiz's.
Thank you for the comments on that. I would love staff to comment a little bit on the idea that Vice Mayor O'Brien put forth, where in a staff report there could be additional documentation if staff has certain concerns about issues, or what Councilmember Brownrigg mentioned, where clarifying in a very clear way where according to legislation that may be beyond our control, where discretion does not exist for us to just adding those kind of details. So I don't know if Mr. Gardner or our city attorney would like to address that, those enhancements. And even the other question that Chair Say brought up, are there other things and checklists that we can do to streamline the process so that the applicants have additional homework on the front end that sort of sets them up for looking and really self-reflecting on their project about that meet our requirements? Mr. Gardner, do you want to comment on that, or our city attorney? I don't see anybody's hands.
I'll start, and then certainly if the city attorney wants. I mean, I do think that part of the reason we did mention the issues with multifamily in the staff report is that is kind of it is like a 2-tiered system now at this point. And I think in particular for community members, they may not be fully versed in Housing Accountability Act and the limited discretion in making decisions on multifamily projects as it compares to a single family or a commercial project. So even if it's not, stated as a recommendation per se, I think staff can be, fairly direct in laying out the framework for those projects as it relates to state law and being clear of whether, how the project does or does not comply with development standards. And then I think in terms of process, I do want to credit the Planning Commission has been working very hard on refining and making improvements to processes, and we have a neighborhood consistency subcommittee, which is well overdue that we should meet to kind of just keep working on these issues. I think things like checklists and whether there needs to be a harder stop on applications that are, from the staff perspective, there comes a time in an application where I think staff will feel they've exhausted their abilities to work with an applicant, and ultimately the applicant is entitled to go forward to the Planning Commission. So occasionally projects will go forward that are maybe all the details have not been fully worked out, and that can be challenging. If we did want to have more harder rules and just say a project can't come forward until it really does check all the boxes, that's something else we could look at as well.
And maybe to the Vice Mayor's point, if staff has sincere concerns that the applicants are going into this without considering, you can consider what controls we could put in place or comments in the staff reports that could provide some insight on that.
Yeah, I think, the staff reports do provide a little option. There's some opportunity for editorializing, or at least kind of giving some kind of commentary on compliance with standards, and then where there are the gray areas. So, I could see that as being a gray area that can just be raised in a staff report where, there may be concerns, and frame it as these are items the Planning Commission might want to really focus on as it relates to a particular proposal.
Okay, thank you. I see that we're really pushing time here. I see the city attorney has her hand up, and then I see Commissioner Schmidt has a final comment, but I think we've kind of got direction from the council where this is headed. Madam City Attorney, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly, just in terms of expectation setting, we can't impose extra statutory steps on the application that aren't in the state statutes or in our ordinances. So we can advise projects to look at certain things and have that information ready for their Planning Commission hearing, but we can't require it as a precondition of getting to the Planning Commission. They have a right to be there and on a certain time frame. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that while staff is trying to implement this direction, there are sort of some hard limits on how far we can go with that process.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. I think it's just, the landscape is just different than it was years ago. And we appreciate actually the opportunity to have conversations like this with our full Planning Commission, with our staff. And, these are hard policy topics to discuss, but they're worth, tackling in conversations like this, and appreciate everybody's candor and thoughtfulness as we move forward. Commissioner Schmidt, do you have a final comment before we wrap?
Just real quick. I actually had a great experience in doing my own project here in Burlingame and had no troubles with Planning Commission. But I also went to many Planning Commission meetings before I did that. And I was very careful to read all the guidelines. And so therefore I was really prepared for what my Planning Commission was going to be like. And I think that some people don't put in that extra effort. And I think it might be something that planning staff could be a bit more encouraging of applicants to do some of that legwork so that they are more ready for what those kinds of meetings go like and the kinds of questions that you get. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great comment. I think ultimately all of us are in public service because we want to make things better for the public and streamline where we can, continuous improvement in that spirit, and then also be sensitive to laws and regulations that are beyond our control in the new landscape. So we appreciate, I think, this conversation, and hopefully it'll continue to make us have great processes going forward. Appreciate everybody's participation. Mr. Gardner, do you have what you need on this matter?
I think so, yeah. So, and I appreciate, all of the input, and as well as from the interested party who had the project. It is good to put things in context and always look at our process and see where improvements and refinements can be made. So this has been a productive discussion, and we appreciate particularly suggestions of how staff can help guide applicants and provide a little more direction and such. So appreciate all the thoughts that have gone into this.
Thanks. We have a lot of faith in you, and wherever you can, I think it'll just continue to make things better. Madam City Manager, Lisa Goldman, do you have any final closing comments for this meeting before we wrap up?
I appreciate that, but since it's 12:21, I'm just gonna say thank you all for this discussion.
All right, thanks to everybody. Very productive. We had some important policy conversations, and we had some some exciting dreams laid forth today when we talk about our future town square. So thanks for engaging, thanks for watching, and everybody have a great Saturday. Stay safe, healthy, and we'll see you either virtually or in person, hopefully in the not too distant future. Take care.
Miss you all.
Yes, meeting adjourned, 12:22.
Bye, everyone. Have a beautiful weekend.
Bye-bye. Take care.